My son abandoned his mother's funeral to attend a wedding, then heartlessly called in the middle of the pastor's eulogy just to ask, when will mom's money be available? I have an urgent financial need. In the silent church, I suddenly realized that my 40-year-old son was now a stranger. My wife had just passed away, but the cruelty of my son and daughter-in-law was even more terrifying than death itself. Little did I know that that call was just the opening shot in a sinister plot they had planned in advance to seize my multi-million-dollar fortune. Before we begin, drop a quick comment for me. Have you ever had to defend someone's memory from those who should have honored it? Yes or no? Your perspective matters here. Some details have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real situations is purely coincidental. What matters most is the lesson about protecting what we love. How do you know you're living your last normal morning with the person you've loved for 35 years? You don't. That's the terrifying reality about finality. It masquerades effortlessly as the ordinary. Tuesday morning, in our Texas Hill country kitchen, mirrored thousands of its predecessors. Celeste hummed a faint melody while scrambling eggs, her silver hair catching the amber sunlight piercing through the curtain-free windows. She had adamantly refused curtains since the day we moved onto the ranch, insisting we let natural light entirely fill our home. I had surrendered that particular argument somewhere around our 10th anniversary. At 62, I had spent 3 decades working as a petroleum engineer, specifically designing massive offshore oil platforms. My entire career revolved around predictable systems. I calculated stress loads on deep-sea drilling rigs, mapped potential failure points in subsea pipelines, and engineered absolute structural redundancy for machinery operating under extreme oceanic pressure. I was a man who anticipated catastrophes for a living. Yet wrapped in the comfortable routines of my own household, I was completely blind to the familial fracture compounding right beneath my nose. 35 years, and you still brew the most exceptional coffee in Texas, I murmured, wrapping my palms around the ceramic mug she set down. Celeste glanced over her shoulder spatula resting in her hand, offering a radiant smile. Flattery will get you an extra strip of bacon, Eugene. She was only 54, too young for the silence that awaited us. She spent her days teaching second graders at St. Matthew's Elementary, patiently shaping young minds with the exact same precision she brought to our home. The domestic rhythm she anchored felt completely permanent. I unfolded the paper copy of the Houston Chronicle, a traditional habit Celeste found endearing in our corporate lawyer, son Desmond, viewed as hopelessly obsolete. The front page detailed fluctuating stock markets and remote geopolitical conflicts, chaos that felt irrelevant to our quiet ranch life. Desmond called again late last night. Celeste mentioned casually sliding soft scrambled eggs onto my plate. It was around midnight. He sounded intensely anxious. I looked up from the newspaper headlines. Our son was 40 years old, yet he seemed to live in a constant cycle of emergencies. He always has some kind of crisis, I said. It's probably another work issue in Houston. Maybe you're right. Celeste settled into the chair across from me. Her breakfast was modest, and she drank her coffee black. I just wish he chose a better time to call. She smiled, but a subtle flicker of apprehension crossed her eyes. I dismissed it as typical maternal worry, never suspecting. It was a countdown clock ticking away its final hours. Every sensory detail of that breakfast remains permanently branded into my memory with agonizing clarity. The sharp smell of her toasted wheat bread, the ceramic warmth against my skin, the halo of sunlight illuminating her hair. We finished our food washing and drying the dishes in synchronized silence, an unspoken language worn smooth by decades of shared existence. That evening, I discovered Celeste in our bedroom, already dressed in her favorite oversized university t-shirt. She was propped against the pillows, immersed in a coastal mystery novel. I kissed her forehead, a habitual automatic endearment. "Sleep well, my love," I whispered. She looked up, her expression incredibly soft. "Always do next to you." Those were the absolute last words my wife ever spoke to me. You expect a warning system to trigger when a life-altering threshold approaches. You assume the universe will sound an alarm, giving you cause to memorize the moment. But reality doesn't provide redundancy. Catastrophes arrive wearing everyday clothes. I fell asleep believing in tomorrow. I woke Wednesday morning to an unfamiliar heavy silence. Before the paramedics arrived, before the fog of grief completely paralyzed me, I reached out to check her nightstand. Celeste's phone sat dark. When I pressed the screen to check the early hour, 3 distinct notifications pierced the gloom. 3 missed calls from Desmond, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m., 12:03 a.m., and 12:31 a.m. The exact window our relationship fractured forever. Engineers don't believe in random accidents. When 3 sequential anomalies disrupt a stable system, it means something is intentionally forcing a collapse. I woke Wednesday morning to a silence that felt wrong in ways my engineer's mind couldn't immediately quantify. No coffee brewing, no soft humming from the kitchen, no weight shifting beside me as Celeste rose for her morning routine. Just silence, the kind that carries its own terrible gravity. I reached across the bed. Her skin was cool. Celeste! She didn't move, didn't breathe. The morning light through those curtain-free windows she loved fell across her face with absolute indifference, illuminating silver hair, closed eyes, the slight smile she'd worn when she'd said those last words to me. Always do next to you. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck, the way I'd learned in offshore safety training, checking for pulse on crew members pulled from the Gulf. Nothing. Her chest didn't rise. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? My wife, I said. She won't wake up. She was fine last night. Please, you have to... The operator's voice was practiced calm, walking me through steps I already knew were futile. Check breathing, check pulse, begin CPR. I did all of it, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, over and over on my wife's body, while a stranger's voice counted in my ear. Her skin grew colder under my hands. I was compressing the chest of someone who was already gone. The paramedics arrived in 12 minutes. I knew because I watched the clock, 5:47 a.m. when I'd woken 5:59. When they came through the door, I'd left unlocked. 2 young men in Navy uniforms who moved with efficient gentleness, checking vitals I knew they wouldn't find. The older one, maybe 30, wedding ring kind. Eyes touched my shoulder. Sir, I'm sorry, she's gone. Time of death estimated between 2 and 3 a.m. Massive cerebrovascular event. She wouldn't have felt pain. Massive cerebrovascular event. Medical terminology for my wife dying in her sleep while I lay 18 inches away, dreaming about nothing I could remember. They asked questions. I answered. Yes, she'd seemed healthy. No recent complaints. 54 years old, elementary teacher. No, I didn't hear anything unusual during the night. Yes, I'd be all right. No, there was someone I could call. The paramedics practiced sympathy, felt like static white noise, between the last time I'd kissed her forehead and this moment where she was just gone. After they left. After the funeral home came for her body. After the house filled with that particular emptiness that follows death. I sat on our bed and picked up Celeste's phone from her nightstand. 3 missed calls from Desmond during the 27 p.m., 23 a.m., 20:30 a.m., the night before the night during his mother died. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Dad, oh God. Dad, I just heard. Wayne called me. I'm so sorry. I'm coming up there right now. You called her, I said 3 times the night she died. Silence on the line. Then I was worried about her. She'd sounded off lately. I just wanted to check in. At midnight. I work late, Dad. You know that. I'll be there in 2 hours. He hung up before I could ask what he'd been worried about. Thursday morning, I drove to Houston, to Lawrence Holbrook's office in the energy corridor. Lawrence was 65, a friend of 25 years whose estate law expertise had helped us set up our trust back when oil money meant something. Now that expertise had shifted from professional service to something that felt uncomfortably like protection. His office smelled like leather and old books. He poured me coffee I didn't drink and sat across his mahogany desk with the expression of a man about to deliver bad news. The estate is frozen, Lawrence said. Standard procedure. The insurance company requires verification, medical records, policy terms, beneficiary confirmation. Minimum 30 days before any payout. Nothing's immediately available. 30 days. That's optimistic. Probate court takes 3 to 6 months. Everything Celeste owned, everything in joint accounts, frozen until the court processes the will and releases assets. I thought about Desmond's midnight calls, about whatever had worried him enough to call 3 times. No money at all, but Celeste just died. What if there are complications? Lawrence's eyes sharpened. What kind of complications? I don't know yet, just a feeling. Eugene, he said carefully. That's precisely when complications arise. The law doesn't bend for emergencies, even family ones, especially not family ones. He opened a drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, set it on the desk between us. Celeste's handwriting on the front. Neat, careful letters for Eugene. Only if. What is this? Celeste met with me 3 months ago, Lawrence said. Privately. She didn't tell you. I shook my head. She said she had a feeling that something was wrong. She wouldn't elaborate, just said if anything happened to her, I was to give you this. He pushed the envelope toward me, only to be opened if something happened to her, her exact words. I stared at my wife's handwriting. 3 months ago. April. What had happened in April? What had she seen that I'd missed? That envelope sat on Lawrence's desk, like a sealed pressure vessel. You don't open those until you're certain the system can handle what's inside. Eugene. Lawrence's voice was gentle. Do you want to read it? I reached for it, touched the paper she'd touched, traced the letters she'd written while alive, while keeping secrets, while seeing something I hadn't. I'm not ready, I said. Not yet. I can't. Lawrence nodded. I'll keep it safe, when you're ready. But I wasn't ready. Not ready to know what my wife had known. Not ready to understand what she'd seen coming while I'd sat across from her eating breakfast, reading my paper, living in the comfortable illusion that our life was permanent. 3 months before she died, Celeste had walked into Lawrence's office and left me instructions. A warning, evidence of something. She'd known. I walked out of Lawrence's office into Houston heat that felt like breathing through wet cotton. Celeste's envelope remained on his desk, sealed, waiting. Sunday I'd bury my wife, and then, ready or not, I'd have to face whatever she'd tried to tell me. Because engineers don't believe in coincidence. And 3 midnight calls, a frozen estate, and a sealed envelope all pointed to the same conclusion: someone had been counting on my wife's death. I just didn't want to believe it was my son. The empty chair beside me felt heavier than Celeste's casket at the front of St. Matthew's Episcopal. Sunday morning. 3 days since I'd found her cold beside me. 3 days since those missed calls. The sealed envelope still sat in Lawrence's office unread. I wasn't ready for what Celeste had known. Today I just needed to bury my wife. The sanctuary filled with faces I'd known for decades. Celeste's teaching colleagues from St. Matthew's. Matthew's Elementary, former students, now grown with children of their own neighbors, from the ranch church members who'd watched us age together. 200 people whose lives she'd touched, filling pews that smelled of old wood and lilies. Briar sat beside me in the front row, my granddaughter's hand finding mine. She was 22, still in her final year at NYU's business school, eyes red from crying that hadn't stopped since I'd called her Wednesday morning. The protective way she squeezed my fingers reminded me of Celeste. The empty chair on my other side was supposed to be Desmond's. Where is he? Someone whispered from the pew behind us. Briar leaned close. He'll be here, Grandpa. He has to be. But her voice carried no conviction. She'd been calling her father since Wednesday. He'd promised to come. Promised he was handling things. Promised. Pastor Vernon Ashford took his place at the pulpit. 65, weathered-faced, 20 years leading this church, nearly that long knowing our family. He opened his Bible to 1 Corinthians and began reading Celeste's favorite passage. Love never fails, never gives up, never loses faith. Vernon said, his voice steady and warm. Words Celeste lived by every day of her 32 years teaching our children. Words she embodied in her marriage, her family, her community. I watched the empty chair. Desmond was just late. Traffic from Houston. Last-minute emergency at the law firm. Something. Vernon spoke about Celeste's dedication to second graders who struggled with reading, how she'd stay after school for hours, patient and persistent. About the garden she'd planted at the church roses that still bloomed every spring. About the way she'd made everyone feel seen. The empty chair grew more conspicuous with each passing minute. What calculation had my son made, weighing his mother's funeral against whatever had kept him away, that made anything outweigh grief? My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I fumbled for it, meaning to silence it. You don't take calls during your wife's funeral, but my thumb hit answer instead of decline. Dad, Desmond's voice came through loud in the quiet sanctuary. Dad, I need to talk to you about Mom's estate. Vernon paused mid-sentence, heads turned. Desmond, this is your mother's funeral. I whispered, pressing the phone tight against my ear, trying to contain the sound. We're in the middle of, I know, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Amanda's wedding is today, and Saskia insisted we come. It's her sister, you understand. But I need to know when Mom's money will be available. I've got urgent financial needs that can't wait. The words echoed, not quite a whisper, not quite contained. Money, inheritance, urgent needs. Briar's hand tightened on mine, her face draining of color. Your mother is being eulogized right now. I said, each word measured and controlled, even as my face burned. This is not the time. Just tell me when I can access the accounts. That's all I need to know. The lawyers are being difficult about timeline, and Vernon stood at the pulpit, Bible open, waiting. 200 pairs of eyes watched me fumble with the phone. The sanctuary's acoustics, designed to carry hymns to the back pews, had carried every word. Money. When can I access it? Urgent needs. During his mother's eulogy. We'll discuss this later, I said, and ended the call with shaking hands. The silence that followed felt like judgment. Vernon cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a moment of silence for Celeste. His diplomatic tone couldn't hide the disappointment on his weathered face. I sat in that front pew, phone still warm in my hand, and heard the whispers start. Did he just ask about money? His own mother's funeral, and he's calling about inheritance. At Amanda's wedding instead of here. I saw it on Facebook this morning. What kind of son? Briar's arm wrapped around my shoulders. I'm so sorry, Grandpa, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. The sanctuary where Celeste had taught Sunday school for 15 years had just witnessed her son reduce her to an obstacle between him and money. 200 people who'd loved her had heard the word inheritance spoken aloud, while Vernon read about love that never fails. Vernon resumed the eulogy, but his words washed over me in a blur. Something about Celeste's kindness, something about her legacy, something about how she'd touched so many lives. But all I could hear was Desmond's voice. When will Mom's money be available? Not I'm sorry I missed her last days. Not I wish I'd called her back that night. Not tell me about her final hours. Just when can I access the accounts? The service continued. People came forward to share memories, former students, fellow teachers, neighbors. Each story a reminder of the woman I'd lost and the son who'd chosen champagne over grief. Afterward, the receiving line felt endless. Hands gripped mine. Voices offered condolences, laced with something new pity. Not just for my loss, but for the public humiliation. For the kind of son who'd skip his mother's funeral to attend a wedding and called during the eulogy to ask about inheritance. Eugene, there are no words, Vernon said when he finally reached me, and I knew he meant both Celeste's death and Desmond's call. The disappointment in his eyes was impossible to miss. An elderly woman who'd taught alongside Celeste for 20 years hugged me gently. I'm so sorry, dear, she said, about everything. The emphasis on that last word made clear she didn't just mean the death. Briar stayed, pressed against my side, protective and furious, fielding sympathetic looks and whispered comments she thought I couldn't hear. His own mother, asking about money during the eulogy. Some people have no shame. The rest of the service passed in humiliated blur. People offering condolences held not just sympathy, but pity judgment about the kind of son who'd skip his mother's funeral to ask about inheritance during her eulogy. 200 pairs of eyes had watched me fumble that phone call. 200 witnesses to the moment my son's priorities became public record. I drove back to the ranch in silence. Briar beside me, both of us thinking the same thing neither wanted to say. The phone call during the funeral wasn't Desmond hitting bottom. It was just the opening move. Briar opened her laptop Sunday afternoon and showed me the digital autopsy of my son's betrayal. We'd driven back to the ranch in silence after the funeral, both of us replaying that phone call. Desmond's voice asking about money, while Vernon read about love that never fails. The humiliation still burned, but Briar's fury had crystallized into something colder. Grandpa, look at this. She turned the screen toward me. Facebook. Desmond's page. A photo from the wedding reception, him and Saskia raising champagne glasses, his arm around his wife, both of them laughing. The caption read, celebrating new beginnings. The timestamp said 10:47 a.m. Sunday morning. Posted exactly when Pastor Vernon was reading the 23rd Psalm, Briar said, her voice tight, while you were sitting in that front pew listening to people whisper about his phone call. I stared at the image. My son toasting new beginnings on the day we buried his mother. But here's what matters. Briar clicked something, pulled up technical details I didn't understand. The metadata. This post wasn't uploaded Sunday morning. It was scheduled 3 days ago. Scheduled Thursday. He set this to auto-post during Mom's funeral. Before she died, Grandpa. This wasn't impulsive celebration. This was choreographed. The room tilted slightly. Desmond had scheduled a celebration post while Celeste was still alive, timed to publish during her funeral service. Not thoughtlessness. Not grief-driven poor judgment. Deliberate psychological provocation. He planned this, Briar said. The wedding, the phone call, all of it, while Grandma was still breathing. I thought about those 3 midnight calls on Celeste's phone, about urgent financial needs that couldn't wait, about a son who'd transformed into something I didn't recognize. 30 years designing fail-safe systems taught me to recognize when a component didn't just break when it was manufactured to fail at a specific moment under specific pressure. Desmond was failing on purpose. Wednesday evening headlights swept across the ranch driveway. I wasn't expecting visitors. Briar had gone back to New York that morning, needing to salvage her semester. I'd spent the day alone sorting through Celeste's things, her teaching supplies, her garden gloves, the novel she'd been reading with a bookmark on page 247. The knock was sharp, impatient. Desmond stood on my porch with Saskia beside him. My daughter-in-law was 30, polished in the way that came from Boston. Real estate wealth, blonde hair, pulled into a perfect chignon expression, carefully neutral. I'd met her a dozen times over the years. She'd always struck me as someone calculating social equations in real time. Dad. Desmond didn't wait for invitation, just walked past me into the living room. We need to talk about Mom's estate. Saskia followed, carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive and official. Your mother's been dead 6 days, I said, which is exactly why we need to talk. Desmond sat on the couch, Celeste's couch where she'd graded papers for 20 years. I need you to co-sign a business loan, $1.2 million. The bank will accept a pledge against Mom's estate as collateral. The number landed like a physical blow, $1.2 million. It's urgent, Dad. I've got a situation that can't wait for probate. What situation requires that kind of money? Desmond's jaw tightened. Saskia placed a hand on his knee, a gesture that looked supportive but felt controlling. Tell him, she said quietly. Desmond exhaled. The SEC opened an investigation into my investment advisory practice. 28 clients invested in cryptocurrency positions, I recommended. The market crashed. They lost $3.2 million total. $3.2 million. Some of them are suing. The SEC is talking about unauthorized trading charges. I'm looking at 3 to 5 years federal prison if I don't settle these lawsuits immediately. I stared at my son. This man I'd raised, taught to fish, helped through Columbia, celebrated when he passed the bar. Now, sitting in his dead mother's living room, asking for $1 million to buy his way out of prison for fraud. You stole from 28 families, I said. I didn't steal. I made investment recommendations that didn't work out. It's not the same thing. The SEC thinks it is. Saskia leaned forward, opening her portfolio. Eugene, this is completely manageable. Texas probate statute allows temporary pledges under Section 73.4 if the executor signs an affidavit of urgent family need. You're the executor. You can legally pledge the estate as loan collateral even before probate completes. I looked at her, really looked at her. How do you know that? I've done my research. This is family helping family, Eugene. Completely standard. Section 7.3.4. That's right. The court recognizes that estates sometimes need liquidity before full settlement. Your attorney can prepare the affidavit. The bank processes the loan. Desmond settles the lawsuits. Everyone moves forward. She said it like she was reading from a manual. Smooth. Practiced. Too knowledgeable. And when did you do this research? I asked. Saskia blinked. What? Estate law. Probate statutes. Executor powers. When did you learn all this? Since Celeste passed. Obviously, we needed to understand our options. She died Wednesday. It's Wednesday now, 6 days. I'm a fast learner, but she wasn't fast enough to hide the flicker in her eyes. Section 7.3.4, Executor Affidavits, Pledge Mechanisms. That kind of knowledge didn't come from 6 days of Google searches. That came from weeks of research, maybe months. No, I said. Desmond stood. Dad, you don't understand. I understand that you scheduled a celebration post before your mother died, timed to publish during her funeral. I understand that you called me during her eulogy to ask about money. And I understand that your wife knows probate law better than most paralegals after supposedly 6 days of research. 28 families, $3.2 million. My son had defrauded 28 families and now wanted me to fund his escape from consequences. You're making a mistake, Saskia said, standing beside Desmond. Her composure had cracked slightly, jaw tight. This is legitimate, legal. We're not asking for a gift, it's a loan against an asset you'll inherit. An asset that's frozen, Celeste's asset, not yours. We're his family, Saskia said. So were the 28 families he stole from. They left 10 minutes later, Desmond's final words hanging in the air. You'll regret this, Dad. When I go to prison, when Briar loses her father, you'll remember you could have prevented it. I stood in my empty living room and thought about Saskia's fluency with probate law. Section 7.3.4, Executor Powers, Estate Pledges. She hadn't learned that in 6 days. She'd been preparing for this conversation long before Celeste's funeral. possibly before Celeste's death. The scheduled Facebook post, the legal research, the midnight calls. This wasn't opportunism. This was a plan, and I was about to learn exactly how long they'd been planning. Thursday morning, I walked into Lawrence's office and told him my son wanted me to commit fraud. I'd spent the night replaying Saskia's fluency with probate statutes, the way she'd cited Section 73.4 like she'd been preparing for weeks. The scheduled Facebook post, the midnight calls before Celeste died. This wasn't grief or desperation. This was orchestrated. Lawrence listened to my account of Desmond's loan demand without interruption, fingers steepled, expression darkening. What they're asking is illegal, he said when I finished. You cannot pledge an estate in probate. The law doesn't allow it. Even if you wanted to help Desmond, which would be insane given the fraud charges, no legitimate bank would touch this. Saskia seemed very confident it was legal, because she's either lying or working with a predatory lender who knows it'll collapse in court. Lawrence pulled out a legal pad. Eugene, we need to shift from defense to offense. Texas is a one-party consent state for recording. That means you can legally record any conversation you're part of without the other party's knowledge. Record Desmond. Record everything, every phone call, every meeting. From now on, before you open your door to them, you turn on your phone's recording app. Their words become evidence. We're going to build a case. The idea felt wrong, recording my own son. But then I thought about 28 defrauded families, about Desmond asking for money during his mother's eulogy, about Saskia's prepared legal arguments. Show me how, I said. That evening alone at the ranch, I sat at my desk with Celeste's sealed envelope. I'd been avoiding it since Lawrence first showed it to me, not ready to know what my wife had seen. But after learning about Saskia's pre-planned probate research, I needed to understand what Celeste had known. The envelope felt light. Inside, a handwritten letter on Celeste's stationery, the kind with little roses printed in the corner and a small USB drive. I unfolded the letter, her handwriting neat and careful. Eugene, if you're reading this, I've lost you. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you while I could. Desmond has been calling me about the property, asking about insurance policies, mineral rights values, whether we'd updated the will. I didn't want to worry you. You had the patent renewals, and your blood pressure was already high. This USB drive has the calls I recorded, 7 of them over 6 months. Give it to Lawrence. He'll know what to do. I love you. I'm sorry. See. I stared at my wife's handwriting. The letter had been written in absolute clarity and protective love. The message was clear. But the message was clear. I plugged the USB into my laptop. 7 audio files dated and labeled. The oldest from January, 6 months before she died. I clicked the first one. Celeste's voice filled my office alive and warm. Hello. Then Desmond. Hey Mom, quick question. Has Dad gotten the Hill Country mineral rights appraised recently? I've got a business opportunity that might need those numbers. I listened to all 7 calls. 6 months of Desmond asking questions, property values, insurance policy details, whether the ranch was in a trust or my name. Each call disguised as casual curiosity. Each call Celeste had answered patiently while secretly recording. The final call from June, 1 month before she died, made my hands shake. Mom, I need you to talk Dad into signing over the mineral rights on the Hill Country land, just as a business partnership with me. Tax advantages. He'd listen to you. Celeste's response was gentle but firm. Desmond, those rights have been in your father's family since 1947. I'm not going to ask him to sign them away. It's not signing them away, it's, no, honey, I'm sorry, the answer is no. 6 months. My wife had been fielding these calls, recording them, protecting me from knowledge that might have let me see what was coming. She'd carried this alone while I sat across the breakfast table reading my newspaper, listening to her voice on those recordings. Calm, measured, shielding me from danger I couldn't see. Felt like discovering she'd been standing between me and a collapsing wellhead for 6 months while I checked pressure gauges and missed every warning sign. Friday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Mr. Whitfield, this is Patricia Moss from First National Bank. I'm calling about your estate account. My stomach dropped. What about it? The account has been temporarily frozen, pending review of an anonymous complaint filed with our fraud prevention department. The complaint alleges financial mismanagement that may have contributed to medical stress for the deceased. Who filed this complaint? It was submitted anonymously, but it included documentation, copies of prescription records showing anxiety medication, blood pressure treatment. The filing suggests your financial decisions caused Mrs. Whitfield significant health complications. I hung up and immediately called Briar. Someone froze the estate account, I said when she answered. Anonymous complaint claiming I caused your grandmother medical stress through bad finances. That's insane. Give me the case number. 2 hours later, she called back. It's Saskia. I traced the digital filing signature through the bank's public records portal. She submitted the complaint using copied pages from Grandma's prescription records as evidence. When? Friday of last week, 2 days after Grandma died. 2 days after Celeste died. Saskia had filed paperwork using medical records she'd copied while my wife was alive. The timeline snapped into focus. The Facebook post scheduled 3 days before death. The probate research requiring weeks of study. Now, medical records copied and complaint forms prepared before Celeste's funeral. She had this ready, I said. All of it. The documents, the strategy, the timeline. She was building a case against me while Celeste was still breathing. Grandpa, this is criminal. This is conspiracy. This is evidence. I thought about Lawrence's recording strategy, about Celeste's USB drive, about Desmond's 6 months of property questions and Saskia's weeks of probate research. 2 days after Celeste's death, Saskia had filed that bank complaint. 2 days, which meant the documents, the copied prescription records, the financial stress allegations, the anonymous filing forms were ready before. Saskia hadn't just researched estate law while my wife was alive. She'd been building a medical case against me, documenting Celeste's prescriptions, preparing to freeze assets the moment they became available. The question was no longer if they'd planned this. It was how long ago the planning started. Listening to my dead wife's voice with my attorney felt like conducting a forensic autopsy on the last 6 months of her life. Friday afternoon, second week after the funeral. I'd spent the intervening days trying to answer one question. How long had they been planning this Saskia's pre-prepared bank complaint? The scheduled Facebook post, the probate research. Now I sat in Lawrence's office with Celeste's USB drive, about to learn exactly when my son had started circling his mother's assets like a vulture. Lawrence's conference room smelled like leather and coffee. He'd cleared his afternoon, locked the door, set up external speakers so we could both hear the recordings clearly. Ready? He asked. I nodded. He clicked play on the first file. Celeste's voice filled the room warm and alive. Hello? Hey, Mom. Desmond sounded casual friendly. Quick question, what's the hill country property worth these days? Just curious. Some colleagues were talking about Texas real estate values. February, 4 months before she died. Your father handles the financials, sweetheart, Celeste said. Her tone was light, but I caught the slight caution. Why do you ask? No reason, just making conversation. Lawrence paused the recording. That's reconnaissance. He's not asking as a son. He's conducting due diligence like he would before acquiring a company. The second call, dated March, followed the same pattern. Insurance policies. How much coverage did we carry? Had we updated our beneficiaries recently? Celeste's answers stayed vague, deflecting. Call 3, April. Mom, have you and Dad thought about retirement planning, estate organization? It's never too early. We're fine, Desmond. Your father was an engineer for 30 years. He plans everything. I'm just trying to help. Make sure you're both protected. Lawrence stopped playback again. 3 calls over 3 months. Each one testing boundaries. Each one she deflects without confronting him directly. She knew something was wrong, but wasn't sure what yet. I thought about those mornings at the breakfast table. Celeste humming while making coffee. Me reading my paper. She'd been fielding these calls and never mentioned them carrying the weight alone. Those 7 recordings were like pressure test results from a failing system. Each call showing another microfracture until you could map the path to catastrophic failure. Call 4 may mark the shift. Desmond's voice lost the casual pretense. Those 3 deep drilling patents Dad developed in the 80s, do they still generate royalties? How does that work legally? Celeste's pause was longer this time. Desmond, these are questions for your father, not me. Why this sudden interest in the technical side? I'm just curious about the family assets, trying to understand what we're working with for the future. What we're working with? Celeste's tone sharpened. Those patents are your father's work, not we. Lawrence leaned forward. That's when she knew. You can hear the shift, mother to guardian. She's protecting you now, not just deflecting. Call 5 mid-June. Mom, the mineral rights on the hill country land, are those separate from the property deed? Do they transfer differently? Desmond, I'm not discussing this. If you have questions about your father's property, ask him directly. I don't want to stress him out. His blood pressure... Then don't ask questions that would stress him out. Her voice carried steel I recognized, the same tone she'd used with second graders who'd tested boundaries too far. But underneath it, I heard something else, fear. Call 6 late June. Has Dad ever considered moving those royalty payments into a family trust? Tax advantages, legal protection. No, and we're not having this conversation again. Mom, I'm trying to help. Goodbye, Desmond. She'd hung up on him. I'd never known Celeste to hang up on anyone. Lawrence ejected the sixth recording. She recognized the pattern by June. Whatever he was building towards, she saw it coming. But she didn't tell me. She was protecting you. Look at the dates June was when you had that health scare. The irregular heartbeat. She didn't want to add stress. I remembered. 3 days of tests wearing a heart monitor, Celeste fussing over my diet and sleep schedule. While I was worried about cardiac arrhythmia, she'd been fielding calls from our son asking about how to separate mineral rights from property deeds. Lawrence loaded the 7th recording. July, 2 weeks before Celeste died. Mom, I need you to talk Dad into signing the Hill Country mineral rights into a family partnership, just as business diversification, tax benefits. You know he'd listen to you. The pretense was gone. No more curiosity, no more casual questions. This was a request. Celeste's response was immediate and firm. No, Desmond. Those patents are your father's life work. 30 years of research and development. I'm not going to ask him to sign them away. It's not signing them away. It's smart asset management. The answer is no. Don't call me about this again. Silence on the recording. Then Desmond's voice colder. You're making a mistake, Mom. Dad's getting older. These decisions need to be made while he's still. Celeste hung up. Lawrence pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. I had an appraiser review those 3 deep drilling patents. Current royalty stream generates approximately $18 million in total value. The mineral rights alone, given in current extraction technology and proven reserves, are worth another $4 million. $18 million? The estate you're fighting over $4.5 million. But he wasn't after the estate, Eugene. He was positioning for the patents. The real money. The room tilted. $18 million in patent royalties. The innovations I'd developed over 3 decades. Improvements to deep-sea drilling, safety systems, pressure valve designs, automated shutoff mechanisms that had saved lives and prevented disasters. The work that had defined my career. Desmond had spent 6 months trying to maneuver those rights away from me. Why didn't she tell me? My voice sounded hollow. Because she loved you, Lawrence said quietly. And she thought she could handle it alone, shield you from your son's betrayal. She didn't know. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Celeste hadn't known she'd die before resolving this. Hadn't known her silent protection would end with a stroke in her sleep, leaving me to discover the siege she'd been under through recordings made in secret. My wife had spent her final 6 months standing between our son and $18 million, and I'd been in my office reviewing patent renewals without knowing she was under siege. $18 million in patent royalties. For 6 months, while I was planning retirement and reviewing technical specifications, Desmond had been circling those mineral rights like they were a hostile takeover target, and Celeste had stood between him and that money without saying a word, protecting me from knowledge that might have saved her life. The question was whether she'd protected me from something worse than I knew. I turned on the recording app 30 seconds before Desmond knocked. The way you'd pressurize a system before testing it under load. Saturday evening. 24 hours since learning my son had spent 6 months hunting $18 million in patent royalties, while Celeste stood between him and the money. Now he was at my door, and I had a weapon he didn't know about. My phone sat in my shirt pocket, recording app, active, red timer counting. Texas, one-party consent. Everything he said was evidence. I opened the door. Desmond looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled shirt, exhausted eyes. For a moment, he looked like the boy who'd come to me with nightmares. Then he opened his mouth. Dad, please, we need to talk about Mom's estate. I need you to understand my situation. I stepped aside, let him enter, said nothing. 30 years designing systems under pressure taught me when a component is failing, don't intervene. Let it fail completely. Document everything. We sat in the living room. Desmond took the couch. I took the chair, phone recording every word. The SEC investigation is moving faster than I thought, Desmond said. If I don't settle these claims, I'm looking at federal prison, 3 to 5 years. I watched him, said nothing. I know the timing is terrible, but she's gone. His voice cracked. That money isn't doing her any good anymore, but it could save me. It could save my life. I let the silence stretch. Engineers understand silence. It creates pressure. Pressure reveals fractures. You're 62 years old, Desmond continued. How long are you going to hold on to all this? The patents, the royalties, the mineral rights? What's the point when I'm the one who needs it now? The phone kept recording. Every word, every calculation disguised as desperation. Why not use this money to save your family while you still can? Desmond's words were like pressure readings from a failing system. Each sentence, another data point, proving structural failure was inevitable, not accidental. Say something, Desmond said. Please, tell me you'll help. I stood. Get out of my house. Dad, get out. Don't come back unless it's with a lawyer in a courtroom. He left. I sat in Celeste's chair and listened to the playback. Clear audio. Every inhuman thing he'd said. She's gone. That money isn't doing her any good. You're 62. Evidence. Sunday morning, Keith Everett arrived at the ranch. I was 55, former Houston police detective, turned private investigator, carrying himself with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 30 years documenting evidence that would hold up in court. Lawrence had recommended him best surveillance work in Texas. Keith sat at my kitchen table with a leather portfolio and digital recorder. Mr. Whitfield, I've been monitoring Mrs. Saskia Whitfield's communications as requested. All legal, all admissible. You'll want to hear this. He set the recorder between us. I recorded a call she made to her mother in Boston yesterday. She was at a coffee shop speaking loud enough for parabolic mic capture from public space. It's illuminating. Keith pressed play. Saskia's voice came through tearful. Mom, he won't sign anything. The lawyers say we need more time. I don't know what else to do. Another voice responded, older, colder, carrying East Coast wealth authority. You married into money, Saskia. Don't come back here empty-handed. Your father and I didn't raise you to fail at this. Victoria Bradford's voice on the recording carried the cold authority of Boston real estate wealth, a 60-year-old matriarch who measured her daughter's worth in dollars extracted from other families. I'm trying, Mom. I didn't think it would be this hard. He's not like other old men. He won't just give in. Then you haven't applied enough pressure. Use the granddaughter. Use the church community. Use whatever leverage you have. But do not come back to Boston without that money. Saskia was crying now. Yes, Mom. I understand. Keith stopped playback. That's Victoria Bradford, Saskia's mother. Boston real estate family. Everything's time-stamped, authenticated, legally obtained. This will hold up in court. I stared at the recorder. A woman I'd never met who'd spent years teaching her daughter that people were resources to be extracted. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Saskia. Almost. Another daughter crushed by parental expectations she could never meet. Raised to measure her worth in dollars, harvested from other families' grief. But then I thought about those prescription records, the ones Saskia had copied from Celeste's medicine cabinet while my wife was still alive. Celeste's anxiety medication, her blood pressure pills, records Saskia had stolen and weaponized filing that bank complaint 2 days after Celeste died. Thought about the probate research. Section 73.4 memorized like a script. The Facebook post scheduled before the funeral. The medical stress allegations prepared in advance. Saskia might be a victim of Victoria Bradford's greed, might have been shaped by a mother who measured love in successful extractions, but she'd made her own choices. She'd chosen to copy those prescriptions, chosen to research estate law before Celeste died, chosen to file that complaint, chosen to stand beside Desmond demanding money during his mother's funeral week. Victim or not, she'd decided whose life to destroy to satisfy her mother's expectations. Keep monitoring, I told Keith. Document everything. Already planning to, they're escalating. When people get desperate, they make mistakes. I'll be there to record everyone. After he left, I sat in my kitchen holding 2 recordings. Desmond's inhuman calculations. Saskia's tearful obedience to a mother who'd taught her that mercy was weakness. The emergency conservatorship petition arrived Monday morning in a manila envelope thick enough to feel like a threat. Those legal consequences I'd promised myself came faster than expected. 2 days after recording Desmond's inhuman calculations and Saskia's tearful obedience to Victoria Bradford, they filed papers with Travis County Probate Court. Malcolm Greer, MD, Internal Medicine. The certificate was dated 5 days ago, last Wednesday, 3 days after Celeste's funeral. Patient exhibits decreased executive function, impaired judgment regarding financial matters, and emotional instability, inconsistent with previous baseline. Lawrence read aloud. Based on recent clinical evaluation, I conclude that Eugene Whitfield shows signs of cognitive decline, memory impairment, and susceptibility to financial exploitation due to grief-induced vulnerability. Immediate conservatorship recommended for patient's protection. I stared at the signature. Dr. Malcolm Greer. I've never met any Dr. Greer in my life, I said. When was this examination supposedly conducted? It doesn't say. Just recent clinical evaluation. That's the first red flag. Lawrence was already typing on his laptop. The second is the surname. How desperate were they to file a petition based on an examination that never happened, signed by a doctor who shared Saskia's blood? Massachusetts Medical Licensing Board, Lawrence muttered, scanning his screen. Malcolm Greer, licensed 1998, internal medicine, Boston General. And let's check social connections. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced speed of someone who'd spent decades investigating opposing counsel's mistakes. Boston Society pages, Greer family connections. Victoria Bradford's maiden name was, there it is. Lawrence leaned back, expression shifting. Eugene, look at this. He turned the laptop toward me. A photo from a Boston charity gala dated 2 years ago. Victoria Bradford, in an elegant gown, standing beside a man in his 50s with the same sharp features. The caption read, Victoria Bradford, with nephew Dr. Malcolm Greer, at Children's Hospital Foundation dinner. He's family, I said. Saskia's first cousin through her mother's side. Blood family. Lawrence pulled up the medical certificate again. A family physician signing a medical opinion in an inheritance dispute involving his own cousin. That's not just conflict of interest, Eugene. That's grounds for revoking his medical license. He certified an examination that never happened. Perjury, medical ethics violation, fraud. Lawrence was making notes, each word clipped with satisfaction, and they attached it to a legal petition filed in probate court. Everything documented, everything admissible. I thought about the engineering principle I'd lived by for 30 years. Stress testing reveals every hidden weakness. Desmond and Saskia had just put their entire scheme under judicial pressure, and the fractures were showing immediately. In engineering, we call it cascading failure. One faulty component creates pressure that reveals every other weakness in the system. They've overplayed their hand, Lawrence said. This petition requests an emergency hearing within 14 days. Temporary freeze on all assets. Immediate appointment of Desmond as conservator with full financial control. He tapped the certificate. But they built it on a foundation of lies that I can prove are lies. What happens now? Now we file our response. We attach your recordings. Desmond's own words about the money not helping Celeste anymore. We attach Keith's surveillance of Saskia taking orders from her mother. We attach evidence that this medical certificate was signed by the petitioner's first cousin who never examined you. Lawrence walked to his window, overlooking Houston's energy corridor. And we request an investigation into Dr. Malcolm Greer for perjury and ethics violations. When a physician lies in a legal document to help families steal an inheritance, the medical board takes that very seriously. They're going to lose more than the money, I said. They're going to lose everything, the petition, their credibility, possibly their freedom, depending on how the DA views the conspiracy evidence. Lawrence turned back to me. Dr. Greer will lose his license. Clifford Rawlings will face bar complaints for filing a petition based on fabricated evidence. And Desmond and Saskia will have proved in court documents that this was never about your competence. It was always about their greed. I looked at that medical certificate. Dr. Malcolm Greer's signature, bold and authoritative. A licensed physician willing to commit perjury for family. Willing to claim I was incompetent based on an examination that never occurred. They'd been so confident, so certain that a medical certificate would be accepted without question, that I'd be too grief-stricken to fight back. That 43 pages of legal language would intimidate me into surrender. But they'd handed me recordings of their conspiracy. Handed me proof of conflicts of interest. Handed me evidence of perjury signed and dated and filed with the court. Lawrence looked up from his computer screen with a smile. I'd learned meant someone had made a catastrophic tactical error. A family doctor with a conflict of interest isn't just bad evidence, Eugene. It's perjury, medical ethics violation, and proof that everything in this petition is fabricated. He tapped the certificate. They just handed us the case. But the petition meant we had 14 days before an emergency hearing and a lot more evidence to gather. My brother called Tuesday morning to tell me my son had been trying to turn him against me. Dr. Greer's conflict of interest had given us ammunition proof that the medical certificate was fabricated, that the conspiracy extended to perjury. But Lawrence's 14-day timeline to the hearing meant Desmond and Saskia had time to rally support to paint me as the unstable one. Now they were working my own family. Can we meet? Wayne asked. Just us. I need to understand what's happening. Tuesday afternoon. I drove to Wayne's house in Westchester. He was 62 years younger than me, a man who'd spent his life avoiding family conflicts, but now found himself lobbied by both sides of one he couldn't escape. We sat in his kitchen. He looked uncomfortable. Eugene Desmond came by yesterday, Wayne said. Said you've been struggling since Celeste died, mental health issues. He showed me some kind of court petition. I waited. He told me you need family intervention, that you're making irrational financial decisions. Is that true? Because you seem fine to me, but I had to ask. I'm fine, I said. What else did Desmond tell you? Wayne shifted in his chair. That the family's worried. That Saskia's been trying to help, but you won't listen. That they're filing for conservatorship to protect you from yourself. And you believe that? I don't know what to believe. You're my brother, but Desmond's my nephew. Wayne rubbed his face. He seemed genuinely concerned, but something felt rehearsed, like he was selling something. I'm selling something, I said. The truth is simple. Desmond defrauded 28 clients of $3.2 million through unauthorized cryptocurrency investments. He's facing federal prison. The SEC investigation is moving forward. He doesn't want family intervention. He wants access to money that isn't his. Wayne stared at me. 3.2 million, 28 families, federal charges. He needs to settle the lawsuits or he goes to prison for 3 to 5 years. And the conservatorship is a scheme to seize control of Celeste's estate before probate releases it. They're claiming I'm mentally incompetent based on a medical certificate from a doctor I've never met. Wayne was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? Nothing. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm asking you to be careful. And I paused, remembering something from our father's estate settlement decades ago. Dad gave you property documents, didn't he, back in the 80s? The original deeds, 1987, mineral rights documentation, patent transfers. He said to keep them safe. Wayne's expression shifted. Why? Because I think Desmond's been hunting those mineral rights for months. Keep those documents secure. They might matter more than we know. Wayne walked me to the door. I don't know what to believe, Eugene. You're my brother. But I need time to think about this. I respected that. Wayne was like a neutral component in a stressed system. Not yet failed, not yet reliable. Just waiting to see which way the pressure would push him. Sunday morning, I went to St. Matthew's Episcopal for the first time since Celeste's funeral. Pastor Vernon's sermon was about grace under pressure. I sat in the pew Celeste, and I had occupied for 20 years, aware of sympathetic glances from the congregation. People who'd known her, watched me with gentle concern. After the service, I walked to the parking lot. Desmond and Saskia were waiting. They stood beside their car, positioned where exiting congregation members would have to pass them. Deliberate, staged. I saw Saskia's hand on Desmond's arm, the same controlling gesture I'd noticed at the ranch. Dad, Desmond's voice carried across the parking lot. Loud, designed for witnesses. We need to talk about your mental health. I stopped, said nothing. Congregation members slowed watching. My father is mentally unstable from grief, Desmond announced to the growing crowd. He can't manage a $24 million estate in his condition. Our family is filing for conservatorship to protect him. Saskia stepped forward. We'll destroy your reputation, Eugene. Everyone will know how unstable you are, how you're hoarding money while family suffers. I stood there silent. Engineering discipline over emotion. Let the system fail completely. Document everything. Pastor Vernon pushed through the crowd. Desmond Morrison. Vernon paused, corrected himself. Desmond Whitfield. Your mother taught in our Sunday school for 15 years. Every person here knows who your father is. They don't know he's incompetent, Desmond said. They don't know We've known Eugene for 2 decades. A woman from the choir interrupted. Margaret, something I'd served with her on 3 committees. We watched him care for Celeste through good times and hard. This man's character isn't in question. Other voices joined. People who'd seen me show up every Sunday for 20 years, who'd watched me volunteer for church repairs, counsel families in crisis, sit with Celeste while she graded papers in the fellowship hall. 20 years of showing up, that's what character witnesses look like when you need them. Every Sunday for 20 years, Eugene. Vernon said, his voice carrying the weight of pastoral authority. Every crisis in this community you showed up. We know exactly who you are. Desmond's face reddened. You don't understand the legal situation. I understand that you skipped your mother's funeral to attend a wedding, Vernon said quietly. I understand that you called your father during her eulogy to ask about money. This community was there, Desmond. We saw. The crowd had grown. 200 people, maybe more. Sunday service had just let out from the main sanctuary. Saskia grabbed Desmond's arm. "Let's go." They left. Engine starting, tires on gravel gone. I stood in the parking lot, surrounded by people who'd known me for 2 decades. Known Celeste. Known what we'd built together in this community. Vernon put a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever's happening, Eugene, you're not facing it alone." Desmond had chosen the worst possible battlefield. 20 years of Sunday mornings, 20 years of potluck dinners and committee meetings and crisis counseling. He'd walked into a parking lot filled with 200 people who already knew the verdict. Not because I'd convinced them, because they'd watched me live it. But public humiliation wouldn't stop desperate men, it would make them more dangerous. My granddaughter was building a network of allies in places our enemies didn't know they had vulnerabilities. Desmond's church parking lot. Humiliation had made him dangerous. Public embarrassment tends to sharpen desperation rather than dull it. But while he licked his wounds, Briar was cultivating something that would matter more than community sympathy, actionable evidence from inside the opposition's own legal team. Monday morning, 5th week after Celeste's death, Briar called from a Manhattan cafe. "She's here," Briar said. But it wasn't just coffee dates. It was fear. Grace Hendricks, the 28-year-old legal assistant to Clifford Rawlings, had reached out to Briar in a panic. She had discovered that Mr. Rawlings knowingly joined Desmond's scheme to hide the federal SEC fraud from the court. Fearing she would be charged as an accomplice and face prison time for destroying legal records, Grace turned whistleblower. She slid a confidential folder across the cafe table with the quiet determination of someone saving her own skin and conscience. "I can't be part of this anymore," Grace said, according to Briar's account later. "Mr. Rawlings knows about the SEC investigation. I was in the meeting when Desmond told him about the fraud. Clifford said we proceed anyway." The folder contained minutes from 3 strategy meetings. Dates, times, attendees. Everything Clifford and his clients had discussed about bypassing probate law and hiding the federal charges. "I need anonymity," Grace had insisted. "Complete anonymity. If Clifford finds out I gave you this, I'll never work in law again. But what they're doing, it's not just bad lawyering, it's conspiracy." Briar photographed every page, thanked her, and called Lawrence before she'd even left the cafe. Attorney misconduct. Knowingly filing fraudulent petitions. Evidence that would destroy Clifford's credibility and possibly his license. 2 weeks of patient relationship building. 2 weeks of Briar establishing trust with a woman whose ethical boundaries had finally been crossed too far. That's what strategic thinking looked like, not dramatic confrontations, but quiet cultivation of allies. Wednesday afternoon, I invited Desmond to the ranch. "Maybe we can find middle ground," I told him on the phone, "before this gets uglier." He arrived eager, carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. Saskia wasn't with him. Interesting, given how she'd steered every previous meeting. "Dad, I brought documents that make this simple." Desmond spread papers across Celeste's coffee table. "Just sign here, here, and here. We can put this whole thing behind us." I scanned the pages. Preliminary asset transfer agreements, temporary conservatorship provisions, and on page 7, a notarized letter allegedly signed by Celeste, authorizing Desmond as financial representative. Celeste's signature. Except Celeste had been dead for 5 weeks, and this document was dated 2 days ago. I said nothing, just noted the forgery and continued reading. "This seems reasonable," I said, "but I'll need to review with Lawrence first. Let me sign this preliminary agreement, though shows good faith." I pulled out the document Lawrence and I had prepared. Single page, simple language. Parties agreed to negotiate settlement contingent upon verification that all debts claimed by petitioner comply with state and federal law. Desmond barely glanced at it. Just signed where I pointed, eager to secure my signature on something, anything that looked like cooperation. He signed that agreement like a man checking pressure gauges. He assumed were calibrated, never imagining someone had reset them to read safe when the system was already failing. The hidden clause would become relevant soon enough. Once we proved his debts violated multiple laws, the entire agreement would void. But Desmond had just signed a document acknowledging that legal compliance was a condition of our negotiation. "I'll send these to Lawrence for review," I said, gathering the forged documents. "Evidence, all of it. We'll talk next week." Desmond left looking relieved. He thought he'd won something. Friday afternoon, Keith Everett called from Houston. "Got something you need to hear," Keith said. "Public restaurant, one-party consent, completely legal." He'd been tracking Saskia's movements for weeks. Friday, she'd met someone at a cafe in the energy corridor. Keith's parabolic microphone had captured every word. I listened to the recording in my truck parked at the ranch. Saskia's voice clear and calculated. Once I have conservatorship authority, everything moves to the Cayman account. The transfer takes 48 hours. Desmond won't know until it's done. The other voicemail professional, probably a banker or financial advisor, asked about timing. He thinks I'm doing this for him. For us, Saskia laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. He has no idea I'm getting out before the SEC indicts him. Let him go to prison. I'll be in Boston with the money. And the father-in-law, Eugene, doesn't matter. By the time he realizes what happened, I'll be offshore, untouchable. I sat in my truck, listening to my daughter-in-law plan to betray everyone. Not just me. Not just her conspiracy against Celeste's estate. She was planning to abandon Desmond to federal prison while stealing everything for herself. Saskia wasn't conspiring with her husband, she was conspiring against him. This changes everything, Keith said when I called him back. You want me to hold this or use it? Send it to Briar, I said. She'll know what to do. Friday night, 11:47 p.m., Briar sent the recording to Desmond's personal phone. The text message was simple. Thought you should know what your wife's planning. B. No explanation. No context. Just the audio file of Saskia explaining how she intended to steal everything and leave him to rot in federal prison. Dad, I'm sending it to him, Briar had said when she called to confirm. Let them destroy each other. Do it. We didn't hear from either of them for 4 days. No calls, no visits, no threats, no parking lot confrontations, just silence. I imagine those 4 days. Desmond discovering his wife planned to betray him, Saskia realizing her plan had been exposed. Both of them trapped in a marriage that was now a mutual hostage situation were not pleasant. Lawrence called it strategic fracture. When co-conspirators turn on each other, they make mistakes. They get sloppy. They start thinking about saving themselves instead of maintaining the unified front. The call came Tuesday morning, day 5 of silence. Keith Everett reporting that Desmond and Saskia's marriage was destroying itself exactly as we'd anticipated. 4 days after Briar sent that offshore recording to Desmond's phone, the conspiracy alliance was fracturing under its own weight. No more united front. No more strategic partnership. Just two desperate people discovering they'd been planning to betray each other all along. Neighbors reported shouting from approximately 9 p.m. to midnight Monday. Keith said, reading from his surveillance log, topics included offshore accounts, leaving me to prison, and your family's money. One neighbor said it was the loudest domestic dispute she'd heard in 30 years on that street. I sat at my kitchen table coffee cooling, listening to the systematic destruction of my son's marriage. Tuesday, 7 a.m., Mrs. Whitfield exited with 3 suitcases. Public argument on the driveway. She said, and I quote, "You're going to prison either way. I'm not going with you." Where did she go? Airport. Booked a one-way ticket to Boston. Mother's house, I assume. And Desmond, still at the house, alone. He's made 6 calls to her number. She's not answering. They're done, Eugene, Keith continued. Whatever alliance they had, it's over. Now they're just 2 desperate people blaming each other for a plan that's falling apart. I thanked Keith and ended the call. The fracture was complete. Saskia had abandoned ship. Desmond was alone facing federal prison without his co-conspirator wife. Wednesday morning, Lawrence called. Desmond contacted my office, Lawrence said. Wants to meet, without Saskia present. Says he needs to clarify some things about his wife's plans. He's trying a new angle, probably, playing victim of his own wife to gain sympathy. But it's also the first time he's broken ranks. First time he's admitted they're not a united front. Do you believe him? I believe he's desperate, Lawrence said. Whether that desperation makes him honest or more dangerous, we'll find out. I'll record everything. Legal one-party consent. Whatever he says becomes evidence. Set it up. A conspiracy is like a pressure vessel. It holds together only as long as all the welds trust each other under stress. Desmond and Saskia's welds had failed catastrophically. Now we'd see what a fractured conspiracy revealed about itself. 2 weeks later, Wayne called. His voice was shaking, not with fear, with fury. Eugene, you need to come to my house. Now. I found something in the family business files. Desmond? He forged my signature. I drove to Westchester immediately. Wayne met me at the door. His hands were trembling as he led me to his study where papers covered his desk. 3 months ago, Wayne said, picking up a document with careful anger, Desmond signed over management control of our mineral company shares. He used my signature, Eugene. I looked at the document. Wayne's signature, or a very good approximation. Authorization transferring voting rights and management authority to Desmond Whitfield, dated June, 2 months before Celeste died. He didn't just betray you, Wayne said. He betrayed me. I was trying to stay neutral, trying to give him benefit of the doubt, because he's family. But he forged my name. That's not family. That's fraud. When did you discover this? Yesterday. I was organizing estate papers, reviewing old family business documents. Found this in a batch of recent filings. I never signed this, never even saw it until yesterday. Wayne sat heavily in his desk chair. I spent 8 weeks trying not to choose sides. 8 weeks believing maybe you were both right in different ways. 8 weeks giving Desmond chances to prove he was acting out of concern, not greed. My brother had spent 8 weeks trying to stay neutral, and my son had repaid that loyalty by forging Wayne's signature to steal from him. I'm not staying neutral anymore, Wayne said. He forged my signature. Whatever he's planning, you have my complete support now. There's something else, Wayne continued. He walked to his safe, spun the combination, pulled out a manila folder. Dad gave me these in 1987, said, keep them safe, Wayne. They're the foundation of everything. He opened the folder on the desk. Original documents, yellowed paper, careful ink signatures, notary seals from 40 years ago. Land deeds, mineral rights claims, patent transfer agreements, royalty contracts, every piece of paper that proved ownership of the hill country property and mineral rights. Dad made me promise never to lose these, Wayne said. Said originals matter in court when copies can be disputed. I've kept them in this safe deposit box for 40 years, never showed them to anyone, never told anyone except you that I had them. I picked up the first deed, 1947, our grandfather's signature transferring mineral rights to our father. Then 1972, our father transferring them to me. Clean chain of custody, no gaps, no ambiguity. Desmond's been positioning to take these assets, Wayne said. But without these documents, he has no legal standing, no proof, no claim. Every filing he's made assumes these originals are lost or destroyed. He pushed the folder toward me, and now you have them. I looked at 40 years of preserved documentation. Every mineral rights claim Desmond had spent 6 months trying to steal. Every patent transfer he'd been circling. Every deed to the hill country land Celeste had died protecting. Without Wayne's cooperation and these originals, Desmond's entire legal case collapsed. He forged my signature, Wayne said again, voice steady now, resolved. Whatever you need from me, testimony, documents, affidavits, you have it, all of it. I spread 9 weeks of systematic evidence gathering across Lawrence's conference table, like an engineer presenting failure analysis data. Wayne's 1987 documents had completed the foundation. Every piece of original documentation proving my ownership was secured untouchable beyond Desmond's reach. Now it was time to show Lawrence and Briar what those 9 weeks had built. They arrived at Lawrence's Houston office conference room to find me standing beside a large table I'd covered with organized files. 7 distinct stacks, each labeled, each color-coded, each representing a different attack vector, a different vulnerability I'd systematically addressed. 9 weeks since Celeste died, I said when they entered. I want to show you everything we have, not just pieces, the complete system. Lawrence approached the table slowly, eyes scanning the layout. You organized this like an engineering schematic, 7 distinct layers. 30 years designing deep-sea systems taught me one backup. Fails, you need 6 more. Same principle applies to evidence. Briar stood beside her grandfather studying the arrangement. You've been building this the whole time. While they were attacking, you were documenting. Let me show you what we have, I said. I picked up the first stack. Layer 1 audio recording, legally obtained, one-party consent. Desmond in my living room saying Celeste's death doesn't matter compared to his needs. She's gone, that money isn't helping her anymore. Time-stamped, authenticated, admissible. Lawrence took the documentation. Transcript. Audio file metadata. Legal opinion on Texas recording law. Layer 2. I moved to the next stack. Celeste's USB. 7 recorded calls spanning 6 months. Proof Desmond targeted the mineral rights while she was alive. Her voice as witness from beyond the grave. Every call showing escalation from curiosity to demand. Briar lifted the USB drive, turning it over in her hands. Grandma built the foundation. She knew before any of us. Layer 3. I gestured to Briar's stack. Your metadata analysis. The Facebook post celebrating at Amanda's wedding was scheduled 3 days before Celeste died. Not impulsive grief, premeditated psychological warfare. You proved that. Premeditation, Lawrence murmured, changes everything in court. Layer 4. I handed him Keith's surveillance report. Legal recording from public restaurant, Saskia's voice clearly stating offshore account plan. Once I have conservatorship, transfer everything before Desmond discovers. Let him go to prison. I'll be in Boston with the money. Proves she was betraying everyone, including her co-conspirator husband. Lawrence studied the documentation. 4 layers so far, each one independently damaging, together building a pattern. I designed this evidence matrix the way I designed pressure vessels. For 3-mile-deep ocean floors, every single component tested to fail-safe standards, redundancy built into every layer. Layer 5. I spread out the agreement documents. Desmond's signature on papers with forged Celeste signature dated after her death. Plus, my preliminary agreement with your hidden clause valid only if he proves his debts don't violate law. He signed without reading carefully, signed his own trap. He agreed that legal compliance was a condition, Lawrence said, reading his own clause. When we prove the SEC fraud and forged signatures violate multiple statutes, this entire agreement voids, but his signature stays on record. Layer 6? I handed him Grace Hendricks's folder. Internal meeting minutes from Clifford Rawlings's office. His own legal assistant documenting that he knew about the SEC investigation and advised proceeding anyway. Attorney misconduct, possibly disbarment. Lawrence read the minutes with growing satisfaction. Grace documented 3 separate meetings where Clifford discussed hiding the federal charges. This isn't zealous advocacy, this is conspiracy. Layer 7. I placed Wayne's manila folder on the table with careful reverence. Wayne's original 1987 property documents. Every mineral rights claim, every patent transfer, every deed proving sole ownership. Without these, Desmond has no legal claim to anything. No standing, no proof, no case. Lawrence walked slowly around the table, studying each layer in sequence. Processing, analyzing, seeing how they interconnected. 7 layers, he said finally. 7 redundant fail-safe systems. If one gets challenged in court, I said 6 others still stand. If they attack the recordings as hearsay, we have documents. If they challenge the documents, we have recordings. If they question Wayne's neutrality, we have Keith's independent surveillance. Every vulnerability covered by multiple backups. Lawrence looked at me with an expression I'd seen on junior engineers' faces when they finally understood how a complex system worked, not just the parts, but the elegant interconnection of the whole. Eugene, Lawrence's voice carried something between awe and concern. You didn't just protect yourself, you built a prosecution case. What? Look at what you've assembled. Layer 1 proves Desmond's motive, financial desperation over family loyalty. Layer 2 proves premeditation, 6 months of planning. Layer 3 proves psychological cruelty, celebrating during funeral. Layer 4 proves Saskia's conspiracy and offshore fraud intent. Layer 5 proves forgery and perjury. Layer 6 proves attorney misconduct. Layer 7 proves his legal claim is baseless. Lawrence tapped each stack as he spoke. This isn't defensive evidence for a conservatorship hearing. This is a federal prosecution case. Elder abuse. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Forgery. Perjury. Each layer proves a different felony. Together they prove systematic criminal enterprise. Briar stared at the table. Grandpa, you built this to take him down, not just to survive, to destroy. I built it to protect Celeste's memory, I said, to honor what she started. She recorded those calls knowing something was wrong. She prepared evidence. She tried to protect me even while dying. I just finished what she started. With engineering precision, Lawrence said quietly, 7 redundant systems, each one independently sufficient, together overwhelming. He picked up his phone, started making notes. We don't just file a response to the conservatorship petition. We file criminal complaints. We contact the DA's office. We refer Clifford to the Bar Association. We send Dr. Greer's perjury to the medical board. We don't defend, we prosecute. 7 layers. 7 redundant, fail-safe systems, each proving a different crime, each one independently, sufficient to destroy Desmond's case. Celeste had built the foundation with her USB quietly recording evidence for 6 months, while I'd been oblivious. I'd spent 9 weeks finishing what my wife started. Lawrence was right, we hadn't just built a defense, we'd built a prosecution. But before we could deploy it, Desmond made one final desperate move. My son wanted to talk to my lawyer without me in the room, which meant he was either genuinely broken or setting a new trap. The 7-layer prosecution case was complete. Lawrence had recognized what I'd built, not just defense but offensive warfare evidence, sufficient to destroy Desmond's claims and prove federal crimes. Then Desmond called requesting a private meeting. No Eugene, no Saskia, just him and Lawrence. That was the desperate move. Week 10, Lawrence's Houston office. I sat at home while my attorney met with my son. Recording app, ring, one-party consent. Whatever Desmond said would become part of the matrix. Lawrence called me 90 minutes later. Eugene, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. I waited. Desmond broke down. Completely. These weren't crocodile tears. I've been doing this 30 years. I know the difference. Your son sat in my office and wept like a man who'd just realized what he'd become. Lawrence's voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Sympathy. He said, "Tell my father I'm sorry. Please, just tell him I was scared. I was so scared of prison that I couldn't think straight." Then he put his head in his hands and sobbed. Real ugly crying, the kind you can't fake. I sat at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the empty chair where Celeste used to sit. "He knows what he did," Lawrence continued. "He knows he can't undo calling during the funeral. Can't undo what he said about the money. He said, I'm still his son. I'm still." And then he couldn't finish. Just broke down completely. "What did you tell him?" I told him I'd relay his message. That's all I could promise. I thanked Lawrence and sat in silence for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe those tears meant the son I raised was still in there somewhere, fighting his way back through the wreckage he'd created. The boy who'd climbed into our bed during thunderstorms at 3 a.m., who'd held my hand crossing parking lots until he was 8, who'd cried when his goldfish died. That boy had been real. But so was the man who'd said she's gone, that money isn't helping her anymore. Before I tell you what made the forgiveness question impossible to answer, comment A or BA if you think genuine tears change what someone deserves. Or B if premeditated betrayal stays unforgivable no matter the remorse. Add one short reason, because what I discovered next ended the moral debate. Quick note: the following contains adapted details for emotional depth, but the core truth remains. Lawrence called back an hour later. "Will you see him, Eugene? He's asking to talk to you directly." No lawyers, no Saskia, just father and son. I thought about that question for a long time. Thought about the thunderstorm boy and the funeral phone call. Thought about Celeste's voice on those recordings protecting me from knowledge that might have saved her. Thought about 9 weeks of systematic evidence gathering and the 7-layer matrix that proved my son was a criminal. "I keep thinking about the boy who was afraid of thunderstorms," I said finally. "Who'd climb into our bed at 3 a.m. That was real too. Both versions are my son." "Yes," Lawrence said quietly. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Lawrence. I don't even know if I should." "That's honest. Tell him I need time." I hung up and sat in Celeste's kitchen, wrestling with the unbearable weight of fatherhood. Wanting to believe in redemption. Wanting to see genuine remorse as a path back. Wanting my son to be savable. My phone rang again. Briar calling from New York. "Dad, I found something in the case files Lawrence sent me for cross-referencing." Her voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when she was trying not to cry. "Mortgage documents, property refinancing papers, multiple pages. Grandma's signature appears on all of them. We know about the forged signatures after her death. These aren't after Dad. They're dated March 15th, 2025. The kitchen tilted slightly. March, but that's... Celeste didn't die until July. She was alive. She was healthy in March. He forged her signature 4 months before she died, Dad. While she was alive. While she was teaching. While she could have stopped him if she'd known. March 15th. 4 months before Celeste died. While she was teaching her last semester. While we were planning retirement. While our son was already forging her signature. This isn't grief," Briar said, voice breaking. "This isn't desperation after she died. He was doing this while she was alive. While she was healthy. This is premeditated elder abuse." I thought about Desmond's tears in Lawrence's office. Genuine, Lawrence had said, real remorse, a broken man facing what he had become. But those tears couldn't change the date on those documents. March 15th, 2025. 4 months before the stroke. 4 months before the funeral, where he'd called asking about money. 4 months before any of his excuses about grief and fear and desperation could possibly apply. He'd been forging his living mother's signature. Planning this conspiracy while she was teaching second graders and tending her roses and recording those USB calls because she knew something was wrong. She'd known in March. She'd known because in March, Desmond had already started. "Send me the documents," I told Briar. "Everything. Every page with every forged signature and every date. Dad, what are you going to do? I'm going to add it to the matrix. Layer 8. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone long after Briar hung up, thinking about Desmond's tears, about genuine remorse and broken men and sons who'd lost their way. Thinking about March 15th. 4 months before Celeste died, Desmond had been forging her signature on property documents, not after her death in desperate grief, not in the chaos following her stroke. 4 months before, while she was alive, teaching, laughing, planning our future. Some things cannot be forgiven. Some things should not be. Whatever tears Desmond had shed in Lawrence's office, they couldn't wash away what he'd done while his mother was still breathing. The court-ordered psychiatrist spent 4 hours testing whether grief had destroyed my ability to think clearly. March forgery had made the forgiveness question moot. Desmond's tears couldn't erase documents signed while Celeste was alive. But the conservatorship hearing was still scheduled, and Desmond's petition claimed I was mentally incompetent. The court wanted independent verification. Week 11, Texas Memorial Hospital. Dr. Helen Stratford, the court-appointed psychiatrist, conducted the evaluation with the methodical thoroughness of someone whose 14-page reports had stood up to legal challenge for 20 years. Memory tests, executive function analysis, decision-making capacity assessment, problem-solving scenarios. 4 hours of clinical questioning designed to reveal cognitive impairment caused by grief. Her report arrived at Lawrence's office 3 days later. 14 pages. Comprehensive analysis. 3-word conclusion on the final page: no cognitive impairment. Mr. Whitfield demonstrates excellent cognitive function across all assessment domains, Lawrence read from Dr. Stratford's summary. Memory intact, executive reasoning sound, emotional processing, appropriate for recent spousal loss. No evidence of diminished capacity. Patient fully competent to manage complex financial affairs. He set down the report. Eugene, this is definitive. An independent court-appointed psychiatrist saying you're completely lucid and capable. And Dr. Greer. Medical board opened formal ethics investigation. Conflict of interest, potential perjury in a legal proceeding. He's looking at license suspension at minimum. Somewhere in Massachusetts, a doctor who'd signed a false certificate for family favors was learning that medicine and perjury have consequences. Week 12, late evening at Lawrence's office. Final preparation. The conference table held our 7-layer evidence matrix, organized for presentation. Lawrence, Briar, and I reviewed the order of testimony, the sequence of revelations, the systematic dismantling of every claim in Desmond's petition. The FBI opened a parallel investigation, Lawrence said, based on the SEC referral. Interstate fraud, elder abuse. They'll want access to our evidence after the hearing. Criminal prosecution separate from the conservatorship case, I asked. Yes, even if we win tomorrow, and we will. Desmond's facing federal charges. The conservatorship hearing just establishes the public record. Briar looked up from her notes. What if they try to withdraw the petition to avoid trial? Clifford may try exactly that, Lawrence said. Probably tomorrow morning in the hallway. Last chance to keep everything out of the public record. He'll offer to withdraw in exchange for Eugene not cooperating with criminal prosecution. No, I said. The word came out flat final. There's no offer that undoes what they did to Celeste. I want the record. Every piece of evidence read into the public file. Every layer. All of it. Lawrence studied me for a moment. You understand that means total exposure. Every recording, every forgery. Your son's words about the money, not helping her anymore. All of it becomes permanent public record. Celeste prepared that evidence knowing it might become public. She chose truth over privacy. So do I. We'd spent 12 weeks building this case. The way I'd spent 30 years building offshore platforms, every component tested. Every redundancy verified, ready to withstand any storm the opposition could throw at us. Then we're ready, Lawrence said. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Travis County Probate Court. Judge Caldwell presiding. Everything we've built comes out. I drove home that night thinking about Celeste's USB recordings, about her voice saying, "No, Desmond, those patents are your father's life work. I'm not discussing this." About her quiet preparation, her strategic silence, her protection of me, even as she was dying. Tomorrow I'd finish what she'd started. Week 13, trial morning, Travis County Probate Court. Lawrence and I arrived early, found the hallway outside courtroom 4B already filling with people, church members from St. Matthew's, reporters, family friends. The hearing was public record and word had spread. Clifford Rawlings materialized from a side corridor, walking fast. "Lawrence, we need to talk." His face carried the tight expression of a man who just realized his case was collapsing. Clifford, Lawrence said evenly, we can end this now. My clients will withdraw the petition. Complete dismissal. In exchange, your client doesn't cooperate with any criminal investigation. Clean break for everyone. Clifford's settlement offer wasn't about mercy or compromise. It was about keeping the truth out of the permanent record where it could never be erased. Lawrence didn't even glance at me before responding. My client isn't interested in deals, Clifford. He's interested in the record. Every piece of evidence, every layer, all of it read into the public file. Clifford's face paled. You understand what that means? Everything becomes public record. The recordings, the forgeries, all of it. Your client's son, my client's son committed fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, Lawrence said quietly. The public record will reflect that, accurately, completely. Lawrence, I'm trying to save your clients from the consequences of their choices. That's not possible. We're going to trial. Clifford stood there for a moment, visibly processing. He'd walked into court expecting to argue a conservatorship petition. Now he was facing a 7-layer prosecution case with redundant evidence proving multiple felonies. You've destroyed them, Clifford said finally. You know that they destroyed themselves. I said. It was the first time I'd spoken. We just documented it. Clifford walked away without another word, knowing what was coming. Lawrence turned to me one last time. Once we walk through that door, everything becomes public. Every recording, every forgery, every betrayal. Desmond's words about the money. Saskia's offshore plan. All of it. The press will report it. The church community will hear it. Your son will be exposed in front of everyone. I thought about Celeste building this evidence file alone, recording those phone calls in secret, protecting me from knowledge that might have saved her, preparing for this exact moment. Celeste chose truth, I said, even knowing what it would cost. I'm choosing the same thing. Then let's finish what she started. I pushed open the courtroom door. Inside, judge's bench elevated at the front. Gallery packed with familiar faces, Vernon Ashford in the 3rd row, Wayne beside him, church members filling the seats. Press section occupied, court reporter at her station. And at the petitioner's table, Desmond and Saskia sitting beside Clifford, looking small and cornered. My son saw me enter. Our eyes met across the courtroom. He looked away first. Lawrence and I walked to the respondent's table, set down our files. 7 organized stacks of evidence, each representing a different layer of the matrix. The bailiff called all rise. The Honorable Judge Irene Caldwell presiding. Inside waited the battle that would define my son's future and my wife's legacy. The courtroom smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. I sat at the defendant's table, defendant in my own son's lawsuit, watching 200 faces I'd known for 40 years watch me back. I'd just walked through that door, refusing Clifford's settlement, choosing public record over privacy. Now the battle I'd spent 13 weeks preparing for was beginning. Judge Irene Caldwell entered from her chambers. She was 63, sharp-eyed, with 20 years on the probate bench and a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics to find truth. The bailiff called us to rise. We stood. The judge sat. The machinery of public justice began turning. The gallery was packed. Church members from St. Matthew's, people who'd watched me and Celeste raise Desmond, who'd attended her funeral, who'd witnessed the parking lot confrontation. Wayne sat in the 3rd row beside Vernon Ashford. Press filled the back rows, notebooks ready. Lawrence sat beside me at the respondent's table, our 7-layer evidence matrix organized in files before us. Across the aisle, Clifford Rawlings flanked by Desmond and Saskia. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. Briar sat directly behind me in the first gallery row. She'd chosen her seat, carefully making clear whose side she was on. We're here on petition for emergency conservatorship, Judge Caldwell said, reviewing her papers. Mr. Rawlings, you may proceed with opening statement. Clifford stood, smooth practice playing to the gallery. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a family trying to protect a grieving father from his own declining mental state. Eugene Whitfield, 62 years old, recently widowed, is exhibiting clear signs of cognitive impairment that render him incapable of managing a $24 million estate. My clients, his own son and daughter-in-law, are here out of love and concern. Love and concern. The words hung in the air like smoke. We will present medical evidence of diminished capacity testimony regarding erratic behavior and documentation of poor financial decisions. This petition isn't about money, it's about protection. Clifford sat. Judge Caldwell looked at Lawrence. Mr. Holbrook. Lawrence stood but didn't move from behind our table. Your Honor, this case is about fraud. Systematic, premeditated fraud. We will prove that the petitioners fabricated evidence, committed perjury, and conspired to seize assets through false claims of incompetence. Every allegation in their petition is demonstrably false. Every piece of their evidence is tainted by conflict of interest or outright forgery. This isn't family concern, it's criminal conspiracy. The gallery stirred. Judge Caldwell's expression didn't change. Mr. Rawlings, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Desmond Whitfield. My son stood, walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. He sat. Clifford approached. Mr. Whitfield, please describe your father's behavior in the months following your mother's death. Desmond's voice was practiced smooth. He's been confused, missing appointments, making irrational financial decisions. Several times he forgot conversations we'd had days before. It's clear the grief has affected his cognitive function. Lies, rehearsed, polished lies. Can you give specific examples? In August, he called me 3 times asking the same question about property taxes. He didn't remember we'd already discussed it. In September, he missed a doctor's appointment he'd scheduled. Last month, he tried to invest in a business opportunity that was obviously fraudulent. None of it had happened. Not one incident. I'd called him once about taxes to ask why he was asking questions about my property. I'd never missed a doctor's appointment in my life. The fraudulent business opportunity was fiction. I remembered teaching Desmond about truth when he was 8 years old. We'd been working on a birdhouse in the garage, and he'd tried to hide a bad cut he'd made in the wood. A lie is like a bad weld, son, I'd told him. Looks fine until pressure hits, then everything fails. He'd nodded solemnly, believing me, trusting that truth mattered. That boy was gone. Your Honor, Clifford said, I'd like to direct the witness's attention to the medical evidence. Judge Caldwell nodded. Mr. Whitfield, did you arrange for your father to be evaluated by a medical professional? Yes, Dr. Malcolm Briar conducted a comprehensive assessment. I watched Saskia's hand rest on Desmond's forearm. Light pressure, guiding. She'd been doing it throughout his testimony. A slight squeeze before each key answer, physical steering like she was operating him remotely. And what were Dr. Greer's findings? Desmond glanced at his notes. Dr. Briar found clear evidence of cognitive decline, impaired judgment, and emotional instability consistent with early-stage dementia exacerbated by grief. Judge Caldwell leaned forward slightly. Mr. Whitfield, let me ask you directly. Are you stating under oath that your father is currently incapable of managing his own financial affairs? Desmond hesitated. His eyes flicked to Saskia. She squeezed his arm. Yes, Your Honor. 2 words. Under oath. Perjury committed in open court. I sat there watching my son choose a lie when the truth was sitting 30 feet away in 7 organized files. I waited for anger, for rage at this betrayal, for the hot rush of paternal fury. Instead, I felt nothing but vast, tired sadness, not the sadness of surprise. I'd known this moment was coming since the moment Lawrence and I reviewed the evidence matrix, but the sadness of finality, of watching someone you raised make a choice that severs something permanent. Desmond had just committed perjury to steal from me, and I felt the same bone-deep weariness I'd felt standing in my bedroom, finding Celeste cold beside me. The feeling of irrevocable loss. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield, Judge Caldwell said. Mr. Holbrook, your witness. Lawrence stood. No questions at this time, Your Honor. We'll address Mr. Desmond Whitfield's testimony comprehensively during our case. Clifford looked surprised but recovered quickly. Your Honor, the petitioner would like to introduce Exhibit A, the medical evaluation conducted by Dr. Malcolm Briar. He handed documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Lawrence was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We have serious concerns about the validity of this evaluation. Dr. Briar has an undisclosed financial relationship with the petitioner's wife, Mrs. Saskia Whitfield. They share medical billing offices and have cross-referred patients, generating significant revenue. This is a clear conflict of interest. Judge Caldwell's eyes sharpened. Mr. Rawlings, Clifford's composure cracked slightly. Your Honor, Dr. Briar is a licensed physician whose professional opinion is potentially compromised by financial relationships with your client. Judge Caldwell finished. I'll allow the exhibit provisionally, but I'm noting serious concerns about methodology and conflicts of interest. This court will require independent verification. She set down the document and looked at Clifford. Proceed. I watched my son commit perjury and felt nothing but a vast, tired sadness. Not anger, not betrayal, just the bone-deep weariness of watching someone you raised choose a lie when truth would have saved them. Lawrence adjusted his reading glasses. lifted a 14-page document, and said the words I'd been waiting 20 weeks to hear. Your Honor, the independent evaluation. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. Proceed. Dr. Helen Stratford, board-certified neuropsychologist with the Texas Memorial Hospital, conducted a comprehensive assessment of Mr. Whitfield on October 3rd. Her credentials include 22 years, specializing in cognitive capacity evaluations for Texas probate courts. Lawrence's voice carried across the silent courtroom. Dr. Stratford had no prior relationship with either party. She was compensated at standard court rates. She had no financial interest in the outcome. I watched Desmond's jaw tighten. Saskia whispered something to Clifford Rawlings, whose expression remained carefully neutral. Dr. Stratford's findings, Lawrence continued, conclusively demonstrate that Mr. Whitfield possesses full cognitive capacity. Her evaluation included the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and extensive functional interviews. Mr. Whitfield scored in the 93rd percentile for his age group. Quote, subject demonstrates excellent memory intact, executive function, and superior financial reasoning skills, consistent with his professional background in petroleum engineering. The courtroom stirred. Judge Caldwell made a note. Furthermore, Lawrence said, and his tone shifted to something harder, our investigation revealed material facts about Dr. Malcolm Grier that were not disclosed to this court. Clifford Rawlings stood. Your Honor, the petitioners object to. Sit down, Mr. Rawlings. Judge Caldwell's voice could have frozen water. I want to hear this. Lawrence lifted another document. Dr. Grier is Saskia Whitfield's second cousin. They share a grandmother, Marguerite Bradford, of Boston. Additionally, Dr. Grier and Mrs. Whitfield maintain a medical billing office arrangement through Bradford Health Services, LLC. Our forensic accountant identified $47,000 in cross-referrals between Dr. Grier's practice and specialists recommended to Saskia Whitfield's property management clients over the past 18 months. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Dr. Grier, Judge Caldwell said quietly, signed a court certification declaring no conflicts of interest. Is that correct, Mr. Rawlings? Clifford's face had gone pale. Your Honor, we were not aware. That's a yes or no question. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell removed her reading glasses. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of cold fury that comes from a betrayed trust. Dr. Grier's assessment is stricken from the record. I am referring this matter to the New York State Medical Board for investigation of potential perjury and ethical violations. Mr. Rawlings, you and your clients are fortunate I am not holding you in contempt, but this hearing is now operating under a significantly diminished presumption of good faith. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first real breath I'd taken since walking into this courtroom. The winter light through the tall windows had shifted, painting the judge's bench in cold November sun. I thought about Celeste, who used to say that truth was like bedrock. You might cover it with lies for a while, but eventually the weight of those lies would crack, and the stone beneath would show through. She'd been teaching about students who cheated, but she'd been right about this too. Your Honor, Lawrence said, I have one more piece of evidence. It was difficult to obtain. It was more difficult to listen to. But it proves beyond any doubt that Celeste Whitfield knew exactly what was happening before her death, and that she took steps to document it. He held up a small USB drive in a clear evidence bag. This device contains audio recordings made by Mrs. Whitfield between March and June of this year. She recorded conversations with her son, Desmond Whitfield, in which he repeatedly pressed her for information about the mineral rights, the estate timeline, and her husband's financial decisions. She also gave her husband a recording device which captured a conversation that took place 3 weeks after her funeral. Desmond's face had gone absolutely white. Judge Caldwell nodded to the bailiff, who set up a small speaker system. The courtroom held its breath. The first voice was Celeste's, and hearing it again after 5 months broke something inside me I didn't know was still whole. Desmond, honey, why are you asking about the mineral rights again? Your father and I have told you those stay in the family trust. Then Desmond's voice, smoother than it had been on the stand, but with an edge I recognize now. Mom, I'm just trying to understand the full picture. When you're gone, Dad's going to need help managing all of this. Saskia and I want to be prepared. When I'm gone. Celeste's voice carried a note of hurt that made my hands clench. Sweetheart, I'm not dying tomorrow. Lawrence stopped the recording. This conversation occurred on April 14th. Mrs. Whitfield was diagnosed on March 26th. Her prognosis was 12 to 18 months. She had not yet told her son. He played the second clip. My own voice this time, and Desmond's in my kitchen on July 3rd. Dad, we need to talk about the property taxes on the Albany rental. I paid those in June, same as every year. Right, but with Mom gone, maybe it's time to simplify. Sell some assets. That money isn't helping her anymore. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Not the quiet of waiting, but the thick, stunned silence of people who just heard something they couldn't unhear. I looked at my son. He was staring at the speaker like it had betrayed him, like he couldn't quite believe his own words had been played back in open court. Then his eyes found mine, and I saw the exact moment he understood his mother had known. She'd known everything, and she'd made sure the truth would survive her. The cliffhanger sat between us like a third presence. The ghost of a woman who'd loved him enough to give him chance after chance, and who'd loved me enough to make sure those chances were documented when he refused to take them. Desmond didn't move. He sat frozen at the petitioner's table, staring at the USB drive like it contained something radioactive. Saskia leaned close and whispered something I couldn't hear, but her hand on his arm looked less like comfort and more like restraint. Lawrence reached for a manila folder marked Exhibit G and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce surveillance evidence obtained legally by Mr. Keith Everett, licensed private investigator." Keith stood from the gallery, 55, gray-haired, wearing the kind of patient expression that came from 20 years working Houston homicides. He raised his right hand for the oath without being asked. Judge Caldwell administered it herself. "Mr. Everett, you understand the penalties for perjury?" "Yes, Your Honor. 20 years on the force teaches you to value the truth." "Good. Proceed, Mr. Holbrook." Lawrence handed Keith a small digital recorder. "Mr. Everett, please describe the circumstances under which you obtained this recording." "September 14th, 7:18 p.m. Giuseppe's Restaurant, downtown Houston." Keith's voice had the flat precision of someone who testified in court 100 times. "I was conducting surveillance on Saskia Whitfield at Mr. Eugene Whitfield's request. Texas is a one-party consent state for audio recording. Mrs. Whitfield was in a public establishment with no reasonable expectation of privacy. The recording is unedited and authenticated by forensic audio specialist Dr. Patricia Lennox." Clifford Rawlings stood. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The chain of custody. The authentication is in order." Judge Caldwell's tone suggested she was done with Clifford's objections. "Proceed." Keith pressed play. The audio quality was restaurant, ambient, clinking glasses, low conversation, then Saskia's voice clear and unmistakable. "Once Desmond gets conservatorship, I'm moving everything offshore before he knows." Desmond's head snapped toward his wife. "What the hell is this?" Saskia's face went pale, but the recording continued. A man's voice I didn't recognize. "What about your husband?" "He's too sentimental about his father," Saskia said on the tape, her tone carrying the kind of calculation I'd heard her use when discussing property acquisitions. "I'll handle the asset transfer myself. Desmond won't know until it's done, and by then it'll be too late for him to object." The courtroom erupted. Judge Caldwell's gavel cracked 3 times before the noise subsided. I watched Desmond stare at Saskia like he'd never seen her before. She reached for his hand. He pulled away. Lawrence let the silence settle, then continued. "Your Honor, Mr. Everett also obtained text message evidence that establishes motive for this conspiracy." He projected images onto the courtroom screen. Screenshots of messages between Saskia and Briar, time-stamped and authenticated. The first one made my chest tighten. Text from Saskia Whitfield to Briar Whitfield, October 3rd. Lawrence read, "Once we get Dad's money, settle SEC and avoid prison." Briar's reply, "How much do we need to make this go away?" Saskia's response, 4.2 million. Maybe more if they dig deeper. I felt nothing. Watching my daughter-in-law unravel just the cold clarity of systems under stress. Stress revealing every hidden fracture. In engineering, you learn that catastrophic failures rarely announce themselves. They accumulated silently micro cracks, thermal fatigue corrosion at the joints, until the structure could no longer bear the load. Then it collapsed all at once, and everyone wondered why there'd been no warning. But the warning had been there all along in every compromised weld and weakened beam. Lawrence displayed another message. Saskia to Briar, October 9th. Tell Greer to backdate the assessment. Make it look like Eugene's been declining for months. Another Rawlings. Rawlings says we need witness statements. Can you get your friend from the gallery opening to say something about Eugene acting confused? Another once conservatorship goes through liquidate the Albany property first. Desmond won't notice he never pays attention to the rentals. Saskia stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. That recording is fabricated. This investigator, he doctored it. Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Caldwell's voice could have cut steel. Sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt. You don't understand. I never... Saskia's hands were shaking, her professional mask finally shattering. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Desmond, tell them I never... But Desmond was already standing, already putting physical distance between them. He stepped away from the petitioner's table, away from Saskia, and faced the judge. Your Honor, he said, and his voice carried something I'd never heard from him before, genuine fear. I didn't know about any offshore accounts. This was her plan, not mine. Desmond, what are you doing? Saskia's voice climbed. We agreed. I never agreed to fraud. Desmond cut her off. Or money laundering, or whatever the hell you've been doing with your family's money. The alliance collapsed like a structure with failed welds. No warning, no grace, just catastrophic separation underload. I'd seen it happen on offshore platforms when support beams gave way. One moment the structure held. The next pieces scattered in directions no one could predict, each component suddenly operating under its own physics, no longer part of a unified system. Mrs. Whitfield, Desmond said, and his use of her formal name felt deliberate, planned this entire conspiracy. I wanted to help my father. She wanted to steal from him. Saskia lunged at him. Two bailiffs moved simultaneously, intercepting her before she reached her husband. She screamed something I couldn't make out over the courtroom chaos, but her face told the whole story. Rage and panic and the terrible realization that she'd been betrayed by the one person she'd thought she controlled. Judge Caldwell gavelled the room into silence. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. Mr. Holbrook, does your client wish to present his complete evidence matrix now? Lawrence stood, 7 labeled folders in his hands, each one a layer of proof I'd spent 5 months building: document forensics, financial records, timeline analysis, witness contradictions, medical fraud, recorded admissions, the entire blueprint. Your Honor, Lawrence said, we're ready. Desmond's words hung in the air. I never agreed to fraud, and I realized that in trying to save himself, my son had just given the prosecution everything they needed to destroy his wife and perhaps himself. Lawrence opened the first folder, labeled Layer 1 Timeline, and spread 14 months of evidence across the table, like a blueprinted mechanical system, every piece indexed, every connection documented. Your Honor, Hubert, he said, my client built this evidence matrix using systems engineering principles, redundancy verification, cross-validation. Each layer corroborates the others. The pattern is unmistakable, deliberate exploitation. Judge Caldwell leaned forward, studying the organized display. 7 folders, 7 categories of proof. Timeline documentation showing when each lie was told and each asset was targeted. Financial forensics tracking every attempted transfer. Medical records proving cognitive capacity. Witness statements contradicting the petitioner's claims. Electronic evidence recordings, texts, emails. Legal documentation exposing forgeries and conflicts of interest. Character testimony from people who'd known me for decades. Layer 1, Lawrence said, lifting a timeline chart. March 26th, Celeste Whitfield receives terminal diagnosis. April 14th, Desmond begins asking about mineral rights, 17 days after learning his mother is dying. July 3rd, 3 weeks post-funeral, first mention of conservatorship. The exploitation timeline matches grief, vulnerability, exactly. He moved to the second folder, Layer 2 Financial Forensics. Keith Everett's investigation revealed Desmond opened 4 new accounts in June, created an LLC in Saskia's maiden name, and consulted 3 estate lawyers before Celeste's death. Clifford Rawlings had stopped objecting. He sat beside Saskia like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion. Lawrence reached Layer 3. Medical records. Dr. Helen Stratford's independent evaluation. My client's cognitive function is in the 93rd percentile. Dr. Greer's fraudulent assessment has been referred to the medical board. Then he lifted a document that made the courtroom go completely silent. Layer 4 Witness Testimony. Wayne Whitfield will now address the court regarding certain signatures. My brother stood from the gallery, walked to the witness stand with the steady gait of a man who'd spent 40 years working oil derricks. 60 years old, sun-weathered, wearing the same stoic expression he'd had when we'd buried our father in 1987. Lawrence handed him a mineral rights transfer document. Mr. Whitfield, is this your signature? Wayne studied it for 3 seconds. That's not my signature. I never signed any transfer documents. The petitioners presented this document claiming you transferred partial mineral rights to Desmond Whitfield in 2019. Are they mistaken? They're lying. Wayne's voice carried the flat certainty of bedrock truth. My nephew forged my name to steal from his father. Lawrence produced another document, yellowed official, dated 1987. The original mineral rights deed, filed with Pecos County, Texas. Owner of record, Eugene Whitfield, sole owner. Wayne read, always has been. Desmond had gone gray. Saskia gripped his arm. Handwriting analysis confirms the forgery. Lawrence said, handing Judge Caldwell a forensic report. Your Honor, this isn't civil exploitation. This is felony fraud. I thought about 7 layers of evidence, each load-bearing, each supporting the others. Kind of redundant system that doesn't fail, even when individual components fracture. I'd built platforms in the Gulf that weathered Category 5 hurricanes because every critical function had backup systems, cross-checks, alternative load paths. Lawrence had taken that same principle and applied it to the truth. No single piece of evidence could be dismissed because 6 others corroborated it from different angles. Lawrence lifted Layer 5. Electronic evidence. We've already heard the recordings and seen the texts. Layer 6, legal documentation. Dr. Greer's undisclosed conflicts. Rawlings's firm receiving payments from Saskia's LLC, forged signatures. He paused before the final folder. Layer 7, interstate fraud. Your Honor, the SEC investigation that motivated this entire conspiracy. He spread documents across the projection screen. SEC letterhead. Department of Justice investigation notices. Victim statements from 28 investors across New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey. $3.2 million in hedge fund fraud, Lawrence said. Saskia Whitfield's investment firm promised guaranteed returns, fabricated performance reports, and diverted client funds to personal accounts. The conservatorship was never about my client's capacity. It was about avoiding federal prison. Judge Caldwell's expression could have frozen nitrogen. I'm ordering immediate referral to the FBI and Department of Justice. She turned to Desmond, removing her reading glasses. Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to ask you directly, what was your true motivation in filing this petition? Something, and Desmond snapped. He stood knocking his chair backward, and the words that came out were raw and terrible and honest in a way he hadn't been in months. She's dead. His voice cracked across the courtroom. Mom is dead. That money isn't helping her, but it could save me. Save us. He's sitting on $24 million, building memorials to a corpse while his living son is drowning. The silence that followed felt like vacuum. He's choosing a dead woman over his living son? Desmond's face was wet. His own son. She's gone and I'm here, and he'd rather honor her memory than help me. I heard my son scream that I'd chosen a dead woman over him and thought, yes, Desmond, I did, because she loved me enough to protect me. Even after death, and you loved me so little, you tried to rob me while I was grieving her. Judge Caldwell's voice when she spoke carried the kind of cold finality that ends things permanently. In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed such deliberate exploitation of grief. Mr. Desmond Whitfield, your petition's dismissed with prejudice. You will pay all of your father's legal fees, every dollar Mr. Holbrook has earned defending against your fraudulent claims. She wasn't finished. I am issuing a protective order prohibiting you and Mrs. Whitfield from contacting Eugene Whitfield or accessing any property he owns. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of perjury, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. If the evidence supports it, I expect criminal charges. The gavel fell once. The sound echoed like a door closing forever. Briar appeared beside me. I hadn't seen her move. Her hand found mine and squeezed that small gesture, choosing me over her parents in a way that broke something and healed something simultaneously. She leaned close and whispered, I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't know. I sat in the settling silence and thought of Celeste. Her voice on those recordings. Her careful questions in our final months, asking me to document things, to save emails, to keep receipts. I thought she was being thorough because cancer made her want order. But she'd known. She'd seen what was coming before I had, and she'd smiled while building my defense, never telling me, just protecting me one last time. My wife had won from beyond the grave, and I finally understood love isn't just what you do while you're alive. It's what you leave behind to shield the people you can't bear to leave unprotected. The dominoes fell faster than I expected. Desmond's law practice collapsed in 3 days. The country club membership revocation took 4. And by the end of the first week, my son had become a ghost in the city where he'd lived 40 years. Lawrence's office felt different now that the trial was over. Quieter. The war room had been dismantled, evidence boxes returned to storage, the timeline charts taken down. Just 2 men sitting across a desk, one delivering news about consequences neither could stop. His last client withdrew this morning, Lawrence said, reading from his tablet. The firm partnership is being dissolved. 3 of his former partners are launching a separate practice and specifically excluded him from the announcement. I sat in the leather chair where I'd sat so many times over the past 5 months. The view through Lawrence's window showed downtown Houston in late November, light glass towers catching the low sun, the city moving forward like my son's professional life wasn't ending. How long until the bar hearing? I asked. 6 weeks. But it's a formality. He committed documented perjury in open court. The Texas bar doesn't have discretion when the evidence is that clear. Lawrence set down his tablet. He'll be disbarred by February. I felt nothing. That was the strange part. I'd expected anger, grief, or vindication, but there was just the hollow awareness of consequences playing out according to their own physics, unstoppable as gravity. The country club vote was yesterday, Lawrence continued. 37-0. They've never seen a unanimous expulsion in their 112-year history. And Saskia, same vote, same meeting. The board chair told me they considered it separately just to be fair, but the result was identical. He paused. There's more. The Greer family issued a public statement. He handed me a printed press release on heavy cotton stock, the kind of formal paper old Houston families used for births, deaths, and evidently disownments. The Greer family hereby disowns Malcolm Greer and severs all trust relationships. Effective immediately, I read aloud, signed by Lorraine Greer and the family board of directors. Lorraine is his wife, Lawrence explained. Her family founded Greer National Bank in 1903. Malcolm married into serious money, the kind that comes with expectations about honor and reputation. They've cut him off completely. Trust fund family business interests, even the vacation properties. That's a death sentence socially, I said. It is. Old Houston money doesn't forgive fraud, especially when it makes the newspapers. The family statement was in the Chronicle this morning, page 3 of business section. I thought about Lorraine Greer, a woman I'd never met, reading court transcripts about her husband fabricating medical assessments for money, then signing her name to a document that erased him from her family's century-old legacy. Marriage couldn't survive that kind of betrayal. Neither could social standing. St. Matthew's Episcopal quietly removed Desmond from all committee listings, Lawrence added. No announcement. He just disappeared from the website and the bulletin. Vernon Ashford called me personally to say the decision was made by consensus. The congregation didn't want a public statement, but wouldn't tolerate his continued membership. I watched my son's life disintegrate and felt what Celeste must have felt those final months. Grief for who he could have been. Not anger at who he was, but sorrow for the version of him that had existed once, the boy who'd brought her flowers from the neighbor's garden, the teenager who'd cried when his college acceptance letter arrived, the young man who'd stood beside me at his wedding and promised to build something good. That person had died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who saw his dying mother as an obstacle between himself and money. 3 weeks later, Lawrence called with news about the criminal case. The prosecutor called. Desmond took the plea. 4 years federal prison, full restitution to the fraud victims. I stood at my kitchen counter holding the phone, looking at the chair where Celeste used to sit for morning coffee. And Saskia, 2.5 years. She pleaded to conspiracy and agreed to cooperate fully with the SEC investigation. He paused. Briar received full immunity in exchange for testimony about the offshore planning. The prosecutor said her cooperation was instrumental. My granddaughter had chosen truth over family loyalty. 22 years old, testifying against her own parents to expose their crimes. I thought about what that must have cost her. When do they surrender? I asked. January 9th. Federal facility in Fort Worth. For Desmond, minimum security in Briar for Saskia. 2 months. My son had 2 months of freedom left. 6 weeks after the verdict, the estate was finally released to my control. Lawrence walked me through the final accounting in the same conference room where we'd prepared for trial. $4.5 million from Celeste's inheritance, he said, sliding the statement across the table, plus $2.1 million in court-ordered compensation from Desmond's seized assets, legal fees, and damages. Total 6.6 million. I stared at the numbers. She died protecting this money from our son. Wayne, sitting beside me, put his hand on my shoulder. What are you going to do with it, Gene? I'd been thinking about that question since the gavel fell. $5 million, the exact amount Celeste died. Protecting now transformed from contested inheritance into perpetual motion. Teachers teaching teachers, compounding like interest across generations. 5 million, I said. The Celeste Whitfield Education Fund. Elementary teacher scholarships. Full tuition for undergrad education majors, plus stipends for student teaching. Preference for career changers and second career teachers. Teachers, the people who choose teaching after doing something else the way Celeste did. Lawrence made notes. I can structure that as a perpetual endowment. 5 million at a conservative 4% distribution rate gives you 200,000 annually for scholarships. 20 full ride scholarships per year, Wayne calculated. Forever. The conference room door opened. Briar stood there hesitant. I heard him, she said quietly. About the fund. Grandpa, can I help manage it? I want to do something good with this. Something that matters. I looked at my granddaughter, Saskia's daughter, choosing her grandmother's values over her mother's greed. Choosing education over exploitation, choosing me. Your grandmother taught second grade for 40 years, I said. Now she'll teach forever. I signed the fund documents 3 days before Christmas. $5 million to train elementary teachers in Celeste's name. She would have said it was too much, that we should keep some for ourselves, but I knew what she'd really meant in those final months, in those careful questions, and documented conversations. Make it matter. Make what they tried to steal become something they could never destroy. Lawrence found me in Celeste's garden 2 months after the verdict and asked the question I'd been avoiding. Will you visit him in prison? I was kneeling in the dirt where Celeste had planted her winter roses, the ones that bloomed stubbornly even when frost threatened. My hands were soil dark, my knees damp from the December ground. The garden looked different without her tending it, but I'd been trying. Keeping the irises she loved, the climbing jasmine she'd trained along the fence. Before the sentencing, Lawrence clarified, standing at the garden gate with his hands in his coat pockets. Desmond's attorney called me, asked if you'd consider visiting. One conversation before he surrenders in January. I pulled a weed from between the roses, dandelion root deep and stubborn. I've been asking myself that for 8 weeks. Lawrence walked down the gravel path and sat on the wooden bench Celeste used to occupy with her morning coffee. There's no right answer, Gene, only your answer. I thought about Desmond at 5 years old, terrified during a thunderstorm that shook our bedroom windows. He'd crawled into our bed between Celeste and me, small body trembling, saying words I could still hear 42 years later. Don't let the storm get me, Daddy. Celeste had held him on the left side, I'd held him on the right, and we'd formed a wall of parent warmth around him until the thunder passed and he fell asleep between us. That boy existed. I had to remember that boy existed. But so did the man who'd stood in court and committed perjury while looking at his father. The man who'd forged his uncle's signature. The man who'd married someone who taught him that love was transactional and family was exploitable. When did Desmond forge Wayne's signature? I asked Lawrence. According to the document forensics, the notarization was dated May 19th. I stood brushing dirt from my knees. The timeline settled into place with the precision of an engineering calculation. Celeste died July 8th. He forged Wayne's signature 4 months before she died. Yes, he planned it while she was alive. While she was still teaching second grade, still making Sunday dinners, still believing her son loved us. Lawrence nodded slowly. Some betrayals start before the grief excuse applies. I looked at the jasmine vine Celeste had trained for 3 years. Each tendril, carefully directed, each branch pruned to encourage growth in the right direction. Patient work. Love expressed through attention over time. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It's a dimmer knob. You adjust over years, finding the level where you can live with both memory and release. I could forgive the 5-year-old who'd been afraid of thunder. I could even forgive the young man who'd made the mistake of choosing Saskia. But I couldn't forgive, not yet, maybe not ever, the man who'd looked at his dying mother and seen a timeline for inheritance rather than a person to cherish. I'll pray for him, I told Lawrence, but I won't visit. Lawrence studied me for a long moment. That's forgiveness too, Gene, just not the kind people write about. Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. He forged documents while his mother was dying, I said. It means I release him to God and keep my distance. It means I hope prison changes him. Hope he becomes someone his mother would have been proud of, but it doesn't mean I have to watch it happen. Some distances are permanent. I'll let his attorney know. Lawrence left me in the garden, and I returned to the roses. The winter sun was low and golden, painting everything in that particular December light that makes the world feel both beautiful and temporary. The mail truck rumbled up the drive 20 minutes later. I collected the stack from the box utility bills, holiday catalogs, a thick envelope with the foundation's return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the kind elementary students use. The handwriting was careful, teacher neat. Dear Mr. Whitfield, it began. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I'm the first recipient of the Celeste Whitfield Education Fund Scholarship. I want you to know what your wife's gift means. I sat on Celeste's bench and kept reading. I'm teaching third grade in Dallas Oak Cliff Elementary title. I school 83% of our students qualify for free lunch. I stayed 3 hours after school with Marcus today. He's struggling with reading like I did at his age. His mom works 2 jobs and can't afford tutoring, so I stayed. I'll stay tomorrow too, and next week, and as long as it takes. My throat tightened. Mrs. Whitfield's legacy isn't the scholarship money. Though that changed my life. I was working retail, couldn't afford to go back to school for my teaching certificate, thought I'd missed my chance. But the real legacy is the example she set. 40 years teaching elementary. 40 years staying late for students who needed extra help. That's what I'm carrying forward. Not just the degree she made possible, but the conviction that teaching matters enough to give it everything. The letter continued for another page, stories about her students, gratitude for the opportunity, a promise to honor Celeste's memory through her work. She signed it, with deepest respect and appreciation, Sarah Jenkins, 3rd grade, Oak Cliff Elementary. I held a stranger's gratitude letter in Celeste's garden and thought, this is what they tried to steal. Not money, but the ripple effect of one good life. Desmond and Saskia had seen inheritance and assets and dollar amounts. They'd missed what actually mattered, that Celeste had spent 40 years showing children they were worth her time. And now a woman she'd never met was doing the same thing, teaching students Celeste would never know, multiplying kindness across generations. Celeste was teaching again through a stranger's hands. I sat in the garden, holding Sarah's letter, watching the winter roses prepare to sleep. The jasmine vine needed trimming before spring. The irises would bloom in March if I remembered to fertilize them in February. Celeste's garden would keep growing because I'd keep tending it the way Sarah would keep teaching, because Celeste had made it possible. Some wounds heal, some leave careful scars. I didn't know yet which kind this was: the betrayal from my son, the protection from my wife, the legacy we'd built from what they tried to destroy. Maybe it would be both. Maybe scars are just how bodies remember to protect what matters. Tissue that's tougher than what it replaced, proof that something broke and something else grew back stronger. 200 faces turned toward me as I stood at the dedication podium. I knew Celeste would have hated being the center of this much attention, which is exactly why she completely deserved it. 6 months had passed since I sat in her garden, realizing that emotional wounds both heal and scar. The resulting tissue was noticeably tougher than what it replaced, proving that a family system could break yet grow back stronger. The memorial space at St. Matthew's Episcopal looked entirely transformed since that painful July. Winter had finally given way to early spring of 2026, and the specific plantings Briar and I selected were blooming. Irises lined the stone pathway. Climbing roses scaled the wooden arbor, and fresh jasmine covered the perimeter fence. Our tight-knit community filled the ceremony, including church members, former second graders, teaching colleagues, and scholarship recipients who never met her but carried her spirit forward. Pastor Vernon Ashford, who had led our congregation for over 2 decades, introduced me with heartfelt words regarding faithful service. He possessed a comforting, silver-haired presence that eased our shared grief. Vernon had married Celeste and me, 41 years ago, baptized our son, and buried my beloved wife. I approached the microphone, looking out at the crowd. Celeste wasn't a flawless saint, I began. She was simply an extraordinary teacher who stayed late, a devoted wife who laughed at terrible jokes, and a woman who cultivated irises because they reliably returned annually. She occasionally burned dinner, sang off key, and held incredibly rigid views about loading our dishwasher. Gentle laughter rippled through the quiet sanctuary yard. Deceptive people tried to reduce her life to mere dollar amounts, I said, transitioning as the chuckles ceased. but we chose to focus on what actually mattered to her: educating children and honoring sacred commitments. I gestured toward the newly budded landscape. This is her true essence. Not a victim of greed, but a woman who believed shaping young minds was worth everything. Vernon returned to conclude the service, and then Sarah Jenkins stood to speak. The young third-grade teacher beautifully explained how the newly established endowment fund allowed her to continue multiplying Celeste's patience across generations of students. As the sun dipped lower, my brother Wayne stepped forward to unveil the permanent bronze plaque. Celeste Morrison Whitfield, 1963-2025. Teacher, wife, friend. Love planted here grows forever. Later that evening, I sat on the ranch porch with Briar, passing her the official legal documents Lawrence had finalized. We were transferring co-management authority of the foundation to her young but capable hands. After she left, I walked out to the quiet soil as the cool spring night of 2026 arrived. Looking up at the clear Texas stars, I glanced at Celeste's picture on my screen. The painful chapter was ending, but her legacy was secure. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the truest test of family isn't who shows up for celebrations, it's who stays when there's nothing left to gain but the memory of someone you loved. I don't share this father revenge story to celebrate winning. I share it because I almost waited too long. I almost let grief paralyze me. If I'd given up when Desmond first filed those papers, Celeste's legacy would have funded greed instead of teachers. Don't make my mistake. Don't assume family loyalty exists just because DNA does. These family stories revenge teach us that protecting what matters isn't optional, it's sacred. Celeste knew what was coming and built my defense in secret. That's love that survives death. I believe God put me through this to show others: when someone tries to rewrite your loved one's story for profit, you fight back with evidence, patience, and the truth they can't erase. This isn't just another father revenge tale. It's proof that legacy is earned by those who defend it, not those who inherit the name. If this father revenge story resonated with you, please leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear that family stories revenge aren't about hatred, they're about justice. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Father's Vengeance. Your support helps these lessons reach those who need them most. Thank you for staying until the very end. Family stories revenge like this one contain fictionalized elements for reflection and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental.